Good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Gonzalez.
Present.
McCann.
Present.
Donovan.
Here.
Montgomery Step.
Here.
Goebel.
Here.
Leyba Gonzalez.
Here.
Dillard. Dillard is absent. Gastel is absent. Bush.
Here.
Frank.
Here.
Moreno.
Present.
Elo Rivera is absent. Gloria is
He was just here. He
Yes.
thinks he stepped out
Oh,
to
he
go to the
stepped out?
restroom.
Oh, Elo Rivera is present. Whipern.
Here.
Hall.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's begin with non-agenda public comment. This provides 2 minutes for anyone who would like to comment on something that is not on today's agenda, but is within the purview of MTS. Clerk, do we have any non-agenda public comment?
We do. Manny Rodriguez, please make your way to the podium.
Good afternoon, board members. Good morning, board members. Great to see you all today. Thank you for taking the time to do the hard work for the people. I'm here today on behalf of City High's Community Development. I just want to make a comment that we should be working towards more accessible scanners at stations. You know, at an earlier board meeting, I thanked the staff for allowing the ticket machines to allow pronto tapping on it. That made it a lot more accessible in many stations to tap your card. However, for a lot more stations, the pronto reader is at one edge of the station or across the tracks. So if the train is arriving and people are boarding, you're not going to use those valuable seconds to, walking down the entire platform and scan, or maybe go around the train to the scanner and tap. So I just want to thank you all again for your hard work and just push that we need more accessible pronto reader and tap readers at our stations. Thank you very much.
Next is the original DRA. Please unmute yourself now.
Yeah, so I think there is a confusion going on between people at MTS, the drivers and the people working there, and the people who are crossing the border illegally being dropped off at Iris Transit. According to MTS employees, the people that are being dropped off there are not able to ride transit for free. That they would be, given a ticket possibly if they were caught having done that. But then there's NGOs that are out there volunteering to take them on
30 seconds left.
I'm sorry? 30 seconds? Oh. And so I'm just wondering how, there is a miscommunication between that. So are they able to ride for free or are they not? Because if they're not, why do we have people telling them that they are? And whatnot. So the people that are working there are also saying that they're not having, that they're, oh my gosh, I can't even think because I'm doing 2 things at once. But they're not being treated well, that their pay is bad and they're not being treated good as employees. So I would hope that that could change.
Next is a phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
It's truth, forget future citations. I'm just kind of claiming to be an illegal asylum seeker or whatever. But I recently watched a video of a transit sweeping operation of LA Metro. Along with regular transit security, they had deputies going on every car at the end of the line, kicking people off. They had outreach services on hand, and it may have just been some good propaganda, but there wasn't any rudeness in the film process. It was, however, a questionable additional distraction to one's ride experience and a waste of scarce deputies. What I did like and would like to see MTS do is have the workers who clean the trolleys be equipped with buckets and mops, even if at only the end of the line. It's unacceptable that one should have to step onto a trolley car filled with vomit, sawdust, or mysterious dried sticky fluids. Also, LA Metro has announcements warning and advising against sexual harassment and loud music. This would be a great addition to MTS, especially if it provided a security number to call. I also noticed LA Metro's tracks were not necessary to cross like in San Diego. Seems like LA's public transit system was built much safer. MTS's trolley tracks have led to injuries and are a serious liability. It'd be great if there was some kind of safety fix for that. But the best solution is to start building bullet trains that are aligned with the highways as a realistic alternative transportation option. It'd beat having to be rich to afford highway tolls for managed lanes or express lanes. And if it's still planned at 12th and Imperial, I'm in full support of a new track connection
30
between
seconds
blue and
left.
green trolley lines. I'm hoping this would be visually improved because the current disconnect is awkward and hard to find, especially at night. Literally, the building you guys are in, it makes it difficult to find anything. That whole area could use a redesign and some safety. And just a heads up, last Friday on my drive back from the Sandag Tribal Summit at Paula Casino, an MTS car driver was swerving into my lane. Are they allowed to use cell phones while driving in busy highway traffic? Bad MTS.
Your time
And
has
that-
expired. That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. Let's move on to our consent items, which are items 3 through 19. Clerk, is there any public comment on the consent items?
We do. Manny Rodriguez, please make your way to the podium.
Thank you. I'd like to thank staff for proposing improvements to Pronto in item 9, especially as they relate to open payments. Ride SD, Circulate SD, and a lot of everyday transit riders and San Diegans believe that open payments will make paying more accessible and significantly reduce fare diversion. Ride SD's own analysis found that it takes over 150 clicks to sign up and load money on Pronto, but it takes less than 15 to sign up for an Uber. So we're very supportive of those. One improvement that I could suggest is to allow to activate your fare on your phone. You could do this with Compass if you, like the situation I mentioned earlier, where the train is boarding, you didn't have time to tap your card. Well, in Compass, you could activate the fare on the app and you'd be paid. You can't quite do that with Pronto. So I would say, if I could recommend something else, it'd be to allow Pronto to activate your fare so that when you're on the bus or the train and you didn't have time to scan, you can just do it via your phone. I think this will reduce fare diversion as well and make it easier to pay. Thank you very much.
Next is phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
Item 3, should the minutes say I expressed dissatisfaction with the proposed new copper line, or is that predetermined like everything else? Also, the minutes say for closed session that I expressed dissatisfaction with MTS as an institution. I don't believe that's what I said, but that's hilarious. Item 8, I believe National City did recently approve their MTS for vehicle hire agreement, but is John going to sign on the dotted line today or not? Item 9, has anyone talked to Sandag about interregional passes? They only seem to care about outer regional deals with Mexico. Item 11, $20 million more for no disclosed reason, just could be maybe CIP projects. How about get the projects clarified and then approve increases by double? Item 14 is high-tech's $216,000 parking tracking at the UTC and Nobel parking structures really a necessary service. Is anyone parking there even using the trolley or buses or just shopping? Item 15, delays in over $2 million to build a charging system for the electricity eaters, Zebs, and beds. It might be cheaper and easier for MTS to run their own microtransit cars. Item 16, $537,000 for 5 years of transit enforcement and fare detectors will definitely reap financial gains. That be on the lookout. BOLO messaging system sounds like a useful security capability, but will transit security be taking secret photos of passengers? Item 17, how could a MTS worker tell the difference between a juvenile loitering or going to school via public transit? I'm glad MTS is finally going to take serious crimes like lewd acts to the city attorney and that MTS workers can cite for
30
crimes
seconds
involving
left.
battery. This updated order doesn't have any details on obtaining witness reports, though. There's also nothing covering the issue of harassment. Item 18, I'm for video evidence, but I'm against 119 Axon body cameras for $954,000 because Axon's licenses say they can sell and profit off the footage. And item 19, no to over $378,000 for Sharon's outrageously high salary. I said I'd like to see her job eliminated if MTS made a committee under Sandag. Everyone should be making
Your
just
time
enough
has
to be able to.
expired. The original DRA, please unmute yourself now.
So as far as the transit enforcement and Pronto handheld units for number 16, see, I'm wondering when these people are being dropped off at Iris, if the enforcement is told to leave them alone, or if, because how would you necessarily know who is and who isn't, somebody who's been dropped off by Border Patrol there at the transit center, and if they're not supposed to be riding for free, which I already know that you guys were talking about them riding for free, but then you have people that work at MTS, like I'm saying, that are saying that that is not the case, that they should be ticketed and held accountable. I don't see that happening, because then again, we have people that are going and telling them that they can ride for free. So, would there be a difference if I went and sat next to them and didn't pay? Would I be come up to and approached and try to, given a ticket for not paying while they're not? I'm just wondering how that process works, and what you're telling people that would be enforcing this, how to handle that situation. Would they be just kind of ignoring it? I mean, are they going to ask them for a passport and see if they have some kind of foreign ID, or maybe don't speak the language? What would be their ability to do that? Like
30
what
seconds
are
left.
the requirements? And I think it should be something that is consistent, and not just, different people that will come and it doesn't happen for some, but some it does. So if that would happen to me and I would be almost targeted like that, that's a problem. I think you guys need to be consistent, and it needs to be open and honest as far as that goes. In what's actually
Your
happening.
time has expired. That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. Is there a motion to approve the consent items?
So moved.
Second. Okay, we have a motion from Director McCann and a second from Director Hall. Any discussion? Director Moreno.
Thank you. Regarding item number 17, the revision to ordinance number 5, related to the enforcement authorities of designated MTS employees. This action includes adding the City of San Diego's sidewalk vending ordinance to MTS ordinance number 5. The city ordinance, although appropriate in some areas of the city, like the beaches and Mission Bay and Gaslamp, is far too punitive to new business owners in other areas of the city. It contains the ability for the city to issue a $100 fine for permitted vendors and $250 for unpermitted vendors. And it also allows for the immediate impound of a vendor's equipment or goods for some infractions. I have many constituents who begin their small businesses as street vendors. And I could tell you that when people are starting out in a new business, a lot of times they make a lot of mistakes. So many are new Americans who may not understand the intricacies of city policy, and hitting them with a fine before they get a warning is not fair. And impounding equipment is a particularly difficult thing to deal with. So on top of taking someone's livelihood away, they're also going to have to navigate the city's bureaucracy to get the equipment back. And I can guarantee you that this is going to cost a lot of time and money to vendors who simply cannot afford it. In some instances, we're going to see small business owners just trying to make a living get hit with potential fines and potentially have their equipment impounded. This just is horrible. So I will be voting no on item number 17 because it includes the ability of MTS officers to enforce the City of San Diego's sidewalk vending ordinance. But I do support the balance of the consent agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Moreno. Director Ela Rivera.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not seeking to pull the item, but I have a question about item 16 of the contract. I don't see anything in the contract about data retention and security. Am I missing something? Is there an addendum that spells out what the policies, procedures, and expectations are?
So MTS would own the data, Axon would not, and there are strict data protection policy, and we would retain the information only as long as we're required to fulfill our duties.
So they have no access to the data?
There's my understanding I read the contract once, and it had more data protection provisions in there than I normally see. I can go back and confirm for you. I just don't have it right in front of me, but they would have it in order to provide assistance to us, but they wouldn't, to the extent that we need help accessing the data that would be available on the cloud, but they wouldn't have the right to do anything with that data. Certainly not unless it's like anonymized and deaggregated.
Is there anyone on staff that might be able to elaborate on that? And introduce yourself, Michael.
It's on. All right. Good morning, Michael Strother, Technical Project Manager for this project for MTS. And this contract is just for a hardware purchase. We aren't adding any data capabilities or anything like that. That's not already in existence.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the body cameras. I'm sorry, Councilmember.
No. I'm talking, no, not the body cameras.
Okay.
The handheld units, correct?
Yes. So when the unit is used, to issue citation, does the data in any way get transmitted to the maker of the device?
No,
No.
this is only the hardware, so no.
No.
Right, yeah, I understand. So this is why I kind of hope to see these things explicitly laid out sometimes.
Yeah.
I know what we were buying, but that doesn't necessarily mean that nobody else has access to the information. So, and that's what I want the explicit guarantee of, is that nobody else is going to have access to the information that gets downloaded onto that device or scanned to that device, et cetera.
It's the property of MTS. It's similar to your cell phone. So the data transmits from the device back to our local systems for use by means of an AT&T contract and all of the network connections that pull the data from the cellular into our system.
So does Zebra have any access to the data?
No,
None.
no, it's an Android device. And just like your cell phone, Android wouldn't have access to your data. There's no data sharing or agreements that we have to allow access to data
Well,
external to the device.
I don't know that Android wouldn't have access to data on a cell phone. I'm not going to get into like a theoretical conversation about what access means, but just so we're clear, Zebra has no access to the data.
No access.
All right, thank you for that. I will be voting for similar reasons expressed by Councilmember Moreno. No on item 17. Thank you for the responses to questions on item 16.
Thank you, Director Elo Rivera. Any further discussion on the consent agenda? Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Steppe.
Just want to, I don't know if we're doing a roll call, but just want to register a no vote on 17 as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further discussion?
Are we doing a roll call? Just a question, are we doing a roll call or?
We'll do a roll call on 17 and then we'll do consent on the balance of the agenda. Does that work? Okay, let's go ahead and do the roll call first on, this is item 17 related to the enforcement authorities of designated MTS employees. Clerk, please call the roll.
Gonzalez?
No.
No. McCann?
Aye.
Donovan?
Yes.
Montgomery Steppe?
No.
Goebel?
Yes.
Leyva Gonzalez?
No.
Dillard?
No.
Gastel is absent. Bush?
No.
Frank?
Yes.
Moreno?
Moreno, no.
Elo Rivera?
No.
Gloria is absent. Whitburn?
Yes?
Hall?
Yes.
The motion does not pass with 6 members voting yes, 7 members voting no, and 2 members absent.
Thank you, Clerk. Item 17 fails. We will now, go ahead. Suya.
Could I get clarification? Could we bring back the ordinance changes without that particular street vending?
Is there any objection to bringing back for another vote at a later date?
Correct.
The
July.
balance of the item minus the street vending ordinance provisions from the city of San Diego? Okay, we'll go ahead and bring that back at a later date on item 17.
Would the board entertain a motion to approve it but after striking the sidewalk vending ordinance language?
I'll make that motion if it needs to be done.
I'm happy to second.
Okay, And you have clarity on what that would look like then?
Yes.
Okay, so we are going to move now to a vote on item 17, striking the language regarding the City of San Diego's street vending ordinance. Is there any discussion on that item before we take a roll call vote?
More of a point of information, Chair. I just kind of procedurally trying to understand, do we need a motion to reconsider? And then are we reconsidering with an amended, an amendment? I'm just trying to make sure where we're at procedurally.
So I think Robert's Rules of Order, yes, would require us to do a motion to reconsider. So Director Moreno, you you voted against the original motion. Would you like to make a motion to reconsider?
Yeah. Isn't that the chair's discretion, though, if we're going to get into Robert's Rules of Order?
Well, I didn't bring my book with me. You may be right on that.
But yes, whatever gets this policy to
All
move
right.
forward without the vendor ordinance, happy to support
Thank
and
you,
make the
Director.
motion.
Thank you very much, Director Moreno. And I think Director Hall, you made the second on that?
I don't even remember.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll, whatever I need to, yes.
okay. Does that clarify things procedurally then?
Yes. So
Okay.
now we have the original item in front of us, and it needs to be amended to remove the street vendor ordinance.
Okay, would you like us to vote on the motion to reconsider first, or do you want to go? straight?
However you'd like to.
Okay,
proceed. I'm
we're
just
gonna do,
Tracking things.
all right,
Yeah.
let's just, as long as we're being procedural here, let's just keep it clean and let's just do a voice vote on the motion to reconsider. If this passes, we will then entertain a motion, another motion on this item. So all those in favor of the motion to reconsider, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, please say nay. Motion to reconsider passes. I'm going to turn to Director Moreno for a motion to approve item number 17 minus the language on the City of San Diego street vendor ordinance. We'll get a second from
Correct.
Director Hall. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we will go to a roll call vote on the new motion in front of us. Clerk?
Gonzalez,
Yes.
McCann,
Aye.
Donovan,
Yes.
Montgomery Step,
Yes.
Goble,
Yes.
Leyva Gonzalez,
Yes.
Dillard,
Yes.
Gastel is absent. Bush,
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
Moreno,
Moreno, yes.
Elo Rivera,
Yes.
Gloria is absent. Whitburn, Hall.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously with 2 members absent.
Thank you, Clerk. That brings us to the balance of the consent agenda. Any further discussion on the balance of the consent agenda? Seeing none, I think we could do a voice vote on that. All those in favor of approving the balance of the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. And that motion passes unanimously. All right. We will move on to our public hearing items, and we will begin with item 20. That is the fiscal year 2025 proposed operating budget. Let's open the public hearing on item 20, and we'll begin that with a presentation from Gordon Meyer.
Good morning. My name is Gordon Meyer. I'm the manager of financial planning here at MTS. This morning I'm going to provide the final presentation on the proposed FY25 operating budget. So to provide a brief overview, we had presented an initial draft of the FY25 operating budget to the board on April 25th. Then on April 30th, we were alerted that the state Senate bill SB 125 funds were being frozen for distribution to transit agencies. And so at the next board meeting on May 16th, we discussed this SB 125 news, and we also discussed the potential impact to our budget. Specifically, we reviewed the estimated impact to our FY25 operating budget, and we also looked at our 5-year forecast as well if we remove the SB 125 revenue. During that same meeting, staff recommended postponing most of the planned service increases related to SB 125 until the future of those funds was more certain. That recommendation was approved. So since the May 16th board meeting, staff has continued to refine and finalize our expense and revenue assumptions Specifically, we removed all of the SB 125 funding from our FY25 budget. We came up with our final service level assumptions and reduced our projected expenses accordingly. And we also updated the 5-year forecast based on our final proposed FY25 operating budget that we're presenting today. And so for this meeting, we'd like to review our final service level assumptions, review our final expense and revenues, and discuss the changes versus the prior presentation. We also included, at the request of the board, additional details on our other operating revenues, or non-fare operating revenues. So we will go into some detail on that as well. And then take a look at our updated final 5-year forecast. And then lastly, discuss the most recent news regarding the SB 125 funding, as well as our plan for moving forward. So here is our final proposed revenue schedule for FY25. So on the top line, we're now projecting $78.9 million for passenger revenue in FY25. That was a $1.2 million reduction from our original SB 125 draft of the budget with full service levels. Next line, we have other operating revenue. So here we're now projecting $33.2 million. We did bring interest revenue down because we're not going to receive, or this budget assumes that we're not going to receive SB 125 funding. And then we also brought energy credit revenue down because we're going to generate less credits with the reduced service levels. And so in total, in our FY25 budget, we're projecting $112.1 million for total operating revenue. The next section, we have our subsidy revenues. So we've covered most of these in detail in both the prior presentations. The only change that we've made is that we officially removed the $19.7 million in SB 125 funds from the FY25 budget. That's that SB 125 TIRCP line, which you can see is now zero. No other changes since the prior presentations. And so for subsidy revenue, we're now projecting $304.5 million for FY25, which is a reduction of about $34 million from the FY24 amended budget. And the next line, we have our reserves. So based on our final expense projections and revenue projections, we're projecting the need to use $31.6 million from our operating deficit reserve to balance the budget in FY25. And so total revenues in our final version are projected at $448.2 million. And as requested by the board, we wanted to provide more detail on what exactly is in our other operating revenue. So this is our revenue that we generate through operations, but is not fare revenue. So it includes things like advertising, energy credit, lease income. We do intend to bring a more detailed look at this at a future board meeting, likely in July. But this is a look at exactly what's in our budget in the context of the budget as well. So we have $33.2 million in total other operating revenue included in the FY25 operating budget. We broke that down into 4 major categories. So first we have advertising. So we are projected to generate $2.9 million in vehicle advertising revenue for FY25. So that's the wraps that go on both the buses and the trolleys. Bus bench advertising, we're expecting to generate about $224,000. Bus shelter advertising, which includes the digital kiosk advertising, we're expected to generate about $1.4 million in FY25. The new gas lamp sign that just went in, we just became active this year. We're going to generate a minimum of $653,000 based on the minimum advertising guarantee in FY25. Naming rights, we're expecting to generate $1.1 million. That's primarily the UC San Diego Blue Line naming rights agreement. That's a pretty consistent number that grows over time at about $1 million per year. And then Masters Concessionaire, we pay an advertising vendor who manages some of the concession contracts on our properties. We're expected to generate about $636,000 in FY25. Energy credit revenue, we've talked about this in detail in the prior presentations, but there's 2 programs. There's the federal RINs program where we're expected to generate about $4.2 million, and then the state low carbon fuel standard program where we expect to generate about 3.2 million in FY '25. And then next category, we have land management. Primary driver here is the lease income, and this does include the revenue from our TOD, or transit-oriented development agreements. And then we also generate about 330,000 in right of entry permit revenue. So anytime someone does work in our right of way, they need to file for a permit, and then we generate revenue by issuing those permits. And then lastly, we have a category called other. The main driver here over the last 2 years was interest revenue. We have 8.7 million in the FY '25 operating budget. We also expect to generate about 760,000 in Pronto card sales. And then we also have 525,000 included for freight maintenance, which is our joint use agreement with the San Diego and Arizona Eastern Railroad. They operate on our tracks, and so we bill them a share of our maintenance costs based on their usage. And so on this slide, you can see those 4 main categories trended over the last 13 years. And so you can see we started in FY '13 with about 5 million in other operating revenues, and it's grown substantially and consistently over the years. You can see the red bar is the energy credit revenue. That's a significant revenue for us. The advertising has also consistently grown over the years, as well as we've added the naming rights, the gas lamp sign. Land management is fairly consistent, but we see it start to tick up over the last 3-4 years. And then interest revenue is really what's driving the growth in the other category in the last 2 years. So if you take out the interest revenue, that's really driven by the stimulus funds and hopefully the SB 125 funding, then we would see that number come down closer to the last 4 or 5 years. But that's how that looks. Before we look at our final expense schedule, I wanted to give an update on our final service levels that are projected for FY '25. So you can see on the graphic to the right, the purple bar is the projected service levels that included all of the SB 125 added service. And then the green bar to the right, those are our final projected service levels with the reduced services. And so on the rail side, we're now projecting a 3.3% increase in revenue miles versus the originally planned 14.7% if we had added back all the SB 125 service. On the fixed route bus side, we're now projecting an increase of 2.3% versus the originally planned 6.6% with SB 125. And then on the paratransit side, there's no change. That's not impacted by SB 125, and that's a demand-based service, and we're still projecting a 17.2% increase in demand. So here is our final proposed expense summary for FY '25. So the only changes that we've made since the prior version was to go through and we refined all of our expense assumptions based on our final service level assumptions. So we took the final service levels, ran them through our models for personnel expenses, specifically the operator wages, purchase transportation. Because we're reducing service levels, we brought down those costs. Energy came down based on the lower service levels. And based on our refinements, we ended with an 11.1 million reduction in expenses from that baseline SB 125 budget that included the service, all of the service additions. And so our total expenses for FY '25 with the reduced services are projected at 448.2 million, which is an increase of about 34 million over the FY '24 amended budget. And so on this slide, you can see our revenues and expenses, as well as our structural deficit projected for FY '25. So you can see recurring revenues are projected at 370 million. Expenses are projected at 448.2 million, leaving us with a structural deficit of about 78.6 million. Then we need to add back in the one-time activities. So we added in the 47 million in federal stimulus funds, which is our last year of drawing federal stimulus funds. And then in order to balance our budget, we needed 31.6 million from the operating deficit reserve. With those additions, we do have a balanced budget for FY '25. And so as mentioned, we did update the 5-year projection. So the FY25 column is now our final proposed budget. We used the same growth factors as we had in the prior presentation. So same assumptions around CPI, sales tax growth, energy rates, et cetera. Only difference is that it reflects the final budget now. And then we also did find corrected an error in the modeling spreadsheet. Some in the prior version, some of the FY25 SB 125 costs were still in the model, and even though we intended to back them out. So we corrected that, and if you look, it does improve the projected results a little bit, as is more evident on a later slide. However, this version assumes still that we receive 0 SB 125 funds, and it also does not assume any measures taken to address the structural deficit. So this is really worst case scenario and not a likely scenario, but really just for illustrative purposes. And so you can see here, FY25 is our balanced budget. FY26, we would utilize the remaining funds in our operating deficit reserve in the amount of 55 million. And then we would have a projected operating deficit of just under 24 million. So we would hit the fiscal cliff in FY26. And then you could see that operating deficit would grow sharply in FY27 to 86 million, and then grow slowly after that. And so this slide is recycled from the last presentation, but I did want to bring it up again and just show that the improvement after making the correction to our model. Just a refresher, we had identified the opportunity to move up to $58 million per year from the capital budget to the operating budget, in addition to a one-time $30 million shift from FY25, the CIP. And so in the prior presentation, we had projected that we would get through fiscal year 27 and hit the fiscal cliff in FY28. Now with the updated projection, we would get through fiscal year 28 and then hit the fiscal cliff in FY29. So we got a whole nother year out of this just by making a correction. And so here you can see what that looks like. This is the same projection as a couple slides ago, except it reflects the shift from the capital budget in the green lines. And so you can see here, we're balanced through FY28, and then we would have a projected operating deficit in FY29 of just under 32 million. And we did want to highlight the fact, we've talked about this, but it would have a significant impact to our capital improvement budget. And then we did add a slide to show our 5-year projected CIP as well. And so we could see exactly what that looks like based on our projections. And so here you can see in blue, we have our total CIP project needs identified over the next 5 years. It's broken into state of good repair, which is things like vehicle replacement, trolley replacement, necessary infrastructure repairs and replacement. And then there's other initiatives, which includes things like zero emission bus transition, Division 6, et cetera. And so the projected CIP needs over the next 5 years was estimated at 1.3 billion. And our projected revenues before shifting anything to operations were projected at 842 million over the next 5 years. So without shifting anything to the operating budget, we were looking at a projected 64% funded ratio and a projected 479 million deficit. And so if we shift the funding from the capital budget to the operating budget, you can see that's a total shift of 262 million over 5 years. Then we would we'd be looking at a 44% funded ratio and a projected CIP deficit of 741 million over the next 5 years. So it not only creates a significant challenge to meeting our total project needs, but even just meeting our state of good repair needs to do necessary replacements and repairs and things like that. So we did want to just provide a little more detail on that. And then I also want to highlight the fact that when deciding which projects would have funding shifted away, that would be a discussion with both the Budget Development Committee as well as a board. So just want to highlight that as well. And then, so we did want to share the most recent communication from CalSTA. So they, in our most recent talks, have suggested that we will receive the most, if not all, of our entire SB 125 allocation that was originally planned, but it's really the timing of disbursement that's being discussed. So we could see that second payment delayed a year or things along that nature. So we don't have the final details on that yet, but we hope to hear more over the coming days. But it sounds like we should receive most of that revenue. The final state budget will be available any day now, at the latest in late June, regardless of what's included in this year's state budget. So we should get clarification on when we're going to receive that first payment. But regardless, future funding years will still require an annual appropriation. So there will be uncertainty going forward, likely around that second payment, how much and when that's going to be received, no matter what comes out in this approved state budget. And so based on that, we do think we need to revisit our SB 125 funding plan and take a fresh look at the timing and the priority of the activities included in our plan. Specifically, we have service additions, we have major capital projects, we have 70 million that was dedicated just towards balancing the structural deficit. So taking a fresh look at where we want to position those versus do we want to move some forward based on that first cash that we're likely going to receive. So we want to have a discussion around that. So our intent is to hold a budget development committee in July or August to provide the final updated information on the state budget, revisit our SB 125 plan, and then also discuss in more detail our specific options for addressing the structural deficit. And that brings me to the final staff recommendation that the Board of Directors, 1, receive testimony, review, and comment on the FY25 MTS operating budget at a public hearing, and 2, enact resolution number 24-6 in substantially the same format as attachment B, adopting the FY25 operating budget for MTS, San Diego Transit, San Diego Trolley, MTS Contract Services, and the Coronado Ferry. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. That public hearing is now open. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. We have several. Phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
All right, MTS has a procedurally clean $448 million budget. Ironic when the trolleys are often dirty. I thought the deficit was $78 million, but apparently it's $88 million. Good to know. Wish everybody was aware of how the state blew everybody's tax dollars and then pulled the financial rug from underneath county, cities, and agencies like MTS. However, most people are aware that most decisions by government are about money, not people, not doing what's right. Most only naive representatives at Sandag that believe lies like increased frequencies are actually possible with the current MTS budget. I still believe that MTS requires a desperation donation box because 98-cent or less average fare is a joke. But there's definitely been many times when I've said MTS doesn't deserve any of my hard-earned money based on bad experiences. Same as MTS's parent corporation, Sandag, not 1 half cent or penny more. Pretty much every expense MTS has gone up past expectations. So again, I'm going to recommend that MTS staff research the realities of inflation. I love to see expensive France-based Transdev and their monopoly on our transit systems in America go. I also recommend more concession stands at more trolley stops. Why not? Why is the sales tax expected to increase by almost $3 million? Are people going to start buying more? Or is Sandag going to ensure another tax with broken promises? But I'm glad MTS is going to request $3 million more from
30
Sandag.
seconds left.
Why not $6 million? I'd rather see public transit than bike lanes nobody uses. Dangerous bike lanes too. Caltrans said 2% of people use public transit. That's double the amount of bicyclists. So MTS should get $16 million a mile investments too. And thanks for reminding me about the Coronado Ferry. I got to try that out. Maybe land at a council meeting and bug Mike some more. Don't you think that'd be fun sometime? Thank you.
Next is the original DRA. Please unmute yourself now.
Yes, so it's kind of sad to think about the conditions of, the transit system and what's going on there as far as upkeep and seeing the structural deficit. I mean, it's kind of good when we shouldn't be going into zero emission buses and things like that, because that is a misnomer. It's not even an actual thing. There will never be zero emission, but they are lithium bombs and they can kill people. And the more we get into this supposed green energy, it's good to not have money to do that, because it's actually more destructive to the environment, to the human body. I mean, especially with the radiation and all of the things that it emits. But it just makes me wonder, like, why would you not want to charge? Like, if you have a deficit, why would you let a bunch of people ride for free that have crossed the border illegally and are being dropped off? Because they'll pay, 40 to 80 to 100 and plus dollars just to take a taxi. So it's not like they can't pay for it, but if you have a deficit, you should be thinking about how that could help out. Like, you're actually losing money because of that. And, it's not even people in the community that can benefit from it. So you're actually, doing a disservice to the people in the community when they could be having more money going into the system to make it better, instead of having it be like the crap show that it is. Even the employees know that. They're like, nothing's being taken care of. They're not
30
even, they
seconds
don't
left.
get paid well. I mean, the whole thing is a scam. So, I mean, to have you guys not have that much money and to not be able to do things isn't necessarily a bad idea. You wouldn't do it anyway. You haven't been upkeeping it anyway. And, if you aren't charging certain people, you're actually losing money in the process. And it's pretty negligent to be doing, especially when it's not anybody that's in the community that's benefiting from that. So I just think you guys need to be more mindful and
Your time has expired. Chair, that concludes public comment.
Thank you, clerk, and we will close the public hearing. We will now open board discussion on this item, and we will begin with Budget Chair Director Moreno.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the presentation, Mr. Meyer. I want to reiterate how well we were positioned, how well MTS was positioned for the SB 125 funding, and that was thanks to our employees listening to the board and having our social equity tour happen when it did. Having all the projects ready. So kudos to you guys. Just to reiterate, at the executive committee, I did support this item, which included postponing the increase in trolley frequency and the launch of the new Route 910 bus overnight from downtown to San Isidro border crossing because of the uncertainty related to the SB 125 funding. Thank you, Gordon, for giving us a quick synopsis of SB 125 funding. Happy to hear that it is moving forward. So if the SB 125 funding is restored in such a way that there's an impact to the fiscal year 25 budget after we take action at the board meeting on the 20th, could staff prepare the appropriate action for the budget development committee and then eventually the board of directors? So that we could amend it in July. There's no problem with that.
I think our budget development committee, we're looking at August now. And it would be hard because I don't know when they're going to release the first funds, the ones that were due in last April. So it would be hard for us to actually have some solid recommendation for the board or the budget committee at that point. So we're probably looking more at September.
Okay, so it's going to be a busy committee this year.
Yeah.
Obviously, as the chair, I'd like to, as the chair of the Budget Development Committee, I would like to take action as soon as possible. Can you go to slide 12, please? So if I'm reading that, it's $1.3 billion. Is that correct? In the 5 years?
Yes, that's the total project needs.
Okay, and there would be a deficit for 5 years of $740 million.
Yes, if we shifted the 262 million to the operating budget over the next 5 years.
Okay. I've been a council member now for 5 years, and I pride myself with having our capital improvement projects in my district come to fruition. And I could tell you, I watch my CIPs like a hawk, even, as a staffer I did. So this isn't really giving me a good understanding of our capital improvement projects. It's giving me a big lay of the land. I appreciate you bringing this forward to the board and not the committee, because this is not what I'm asking for. I definitely want a detail of the ZEB programs, the major capital project programs. I would like to see what they are. Detail. I know in the city we do the funding available, the details, the funding still needed, just more information on what MTS's capital improvement project looks like. So that way, we've been very instrumental in my district on getting state and federal funding, and I've worked with the mayor, this mayor and the previous mayor on getting funding where it didn't exist previously from, you name it, state funding, federal funding. I've been known to call CTC executive committee members, begged for money, explained situations. So I would like to see a more detailed list of what this is. Because I could tell you, for most of us, slide 12 is just not doing it, right? We see it, but there's nothing to chew on here. So please bring a more robust, detailed presentation on our CIP projects. And if it needs to be 26 slides, I'm happy to do that, right? Also, let me see what else. Oh, and then to your bullet points, if you don't mind adding a more robust explanation of the capital improvement projects, please. I do want to state that if the 125 funding does become available for fiscal year 25, we absolutely need to restore the funding for the increase in the trolley frequency and the launch of the new route 910 bus overnight from downtown to San Ysidro border crossing. Once again, we did an amazing job with our social equity working group. This is what we said we were going to spend it on. I do recognize what you are saying about the timing and how that is going to present a difficulty, if you will, because we don't know the timing. But this is what we promised the community, and this is what I think we should deliver on. And then finally, once again, I'm going to continue to reiterate, in the long term, I do support MTS exploring a revenue measure to give us more financial independence moving forward. I would say to the chair, regardless of what's happening at the state level, I think we should be in charge of our destiny here and set us up for the next 2 years or 4 years. So with that, I'm happy to move staff's recommendation, just with the addition of that CIP bullet point. Chair, and that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Moreno. Vice Chair Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. Director Moreno, I agree with you. We talked about this at the Executive Committee last week to have more insight into, if we're giving up $30 million in capital, moving to operations, what is getting lost for $30 million? Is it things that potentially could be deferred revenue? Is it things that, who knows? Exactly, who knows? And we're responsible for the system. And I agree with you. We need more visibility when we're shifting funding. What are we giving up? And I would support your request for that, perhaps to go to the BDC first and then through the path. So I agree with your point. Thank you.
If I could clarify, I don't want slide 12 to be considered staff's recommendation. It's definitely more of a responsiveness to the request like that we had received earlier. And everything is on the table when you're looking at a deficit that's equal to 1/4 of your operating budget. So at this point, that's why we wanted to kind of bring this forward.
If I may, Chair, respond to that. I do appreciate slide number 12. Since Mr. Meyer's bullet points didn't have my recommendation from the committee, which was to bring the capital improvement project forward to the budget committee, I presume that this was his presentation, which I appreciate, because if you would have showed us this at the committee, I would have been sad is the word, right? I would have been sad, not just because we have a deficit, but because it really doesn't say, the devil's in the detail. And this is, I would like to see, and it sounds like the board wants to see, we want to have more of a understanding of what our capital improvement projects are. What is state of good repair? We get it, we understand it, it's a mandate, but that's $933 million. What projects are we proposing with this? Are we just saying state of good repair? We need 933 million. I can't tell my constituents with certainty. No, it's actually 17 projects that MTS has, lined up. So more detail is what I'm asking for at the capital improvement, maybe we should have an infrastructure committee. I don't know, but at the budget committee. So thank you.
And I'll be glad to second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion from Director Moreno, a second from Vice Chair Goebel. Any further discussion on the staff recommendation? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Gonzalez,
Yes.
McCann,
Aye.
Donovan,
Yes.
Montgomery Steppe,
Yes.
Coble,
Yes.
Leyba Gonzalez,
Yes.
Dillard,
Yes.
Gastel is absent, Bush,
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
Moreno,
Moreno, yes.
Elo Rivera,
Yes.
Gloria is absent, Whitburn,
Yes.
Hall.
No.
The motion passes with 12 members voting yes, 1 member voting no, and 2 members absent.
Thank you, clerk. We will move to item 21. Item 21 is a public hearing for proposed trolley system changes. We are going to hold the public hearing on this item today. We will actually take action on this item at a later meeting. To kick us off, we'll have the presentation from Dennis Desmond and Brent Boyd.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Brent Boyd, Manager of Rail Planning and Performance for MTS. I'm here with Dennis Desmond, our Director of Planning, and behind me is Brian Riley, our Chief Operating Officer of Rail. And we're very excited to present this project. We think it'll be a big benefit for our MTS passengers, a benefit for our MTS trolley operators, and ultimately we'll actually save some operating funds with it. So we're very excited to present this to you. Okay. So some background, the entire trolley network is double tracked. And what that means is you have 2 tracks, one train can go eastbound, one train can go westbound, they can pass each other. That's with the exception of a 1-mile segment between Gillespie Field and Santee stations in the middle of Cuyamaca Street that is single tracked. And what that means, and you see a picture of it there, what that means is there's only to be 1 trolley on that segment at any given time. So if one's going eastbound, it has to wait for it to come back westbound before another trolley enters the segment. What does that mean? Eastbound trolleys must pass through Gillespie Field Station. The single track segment starts right after Gillespie Field Station. It needs to travel the 1-mile long segment to Santee and back to Gillespie Field before the next trolley goes eastbound. If everything goes according to plan, that means the trolley operator has 6 minutes at Santee for a break. So, and that's at the end of a 66-minute one-way trip and right before starting a 65-minute one-way trip the other way. That's a very short break, and that's if everything goes right on time, if they arrive right on time. And more than half the time, they're 2-3 minutes late, some of that sort. So it's a real challenge for the trolley operators to get there, have enough time for a break, and start their westbound trip on time. What that results in is frequent occurrences where one of the following occurs. The operator does not get a sufficient break. You see that the operator only has a 6-minute break there. If everything goes according to on time, it's not enough time to go to the restroom and get out of there on time. If the operator takes a sufficient break, he might not leave the westbound trip on time. And what that means is we have a ton of major transit centers along the Green Line. You see a list down below: El Cajon, Grossmont, SDSU, Grantville, Fashion Valley, Old Town. We have about 50 bus routes that connect to the Green Line. It also connects with the Blue Line and the Orange Line and Coaster and Amtrak downtown. Anytime a train is running late, you may miss those connections. And even if the train might be 3 or 4 minutes late, our bus connections are tied with the trolley schedule. So if a bus is scheduled to leave 3 or 4 minutes after the trolley arrives 3 or 4 minutes late, that person is not only 3 or 4 minutes late arriving to the station, but they may miss their bus connection, which could delay them another 15 minutes, another 30 minutes. and so on. The third thing that may happen is that the trolley does not complete its trip at all. It may get to Gillespie Field. It's running so far behind schedule that we actually turn it around at Gillespie Field and it returns westbound. So we keep the westbound trip on time. What that means is if you're on the Green Line trying to get to Santee, you get dropped off at Gillespie Field and you have to wait for the next Green Line train to come in 15 minutes later. Conversely, you could be waiting at Santee for the Green Line. That train never arrives. You have to wait 15 minutes for the next one. It's not great customer service when that happens. That happens about once a day. I looked over the last month. It's happened 20 some times over the last month. And we actually do that as standard operating procedure when we know that there's going to be delays on the Green Line. For instance, in April and May, we had construction along the Green Line, signal improvements and so on, which we knew would slow down the trolley. So we actually planned to have a shuttle from Santee to Gillespie Field, a trolley shuttle from Santee to Gillespie Field. And Comic-Con next month, anybody that rides a trolley from Santee will see a shuttle out there, get on the Green Line at Santee, transfer to Gillespie Field, and come the rest of the way into Comic-Con. We do that every year, and it seems to work out pretty well. All that being said, the Green Line historically has the lowest on-time percentage of the three routes, and that's despite the Green Line being the only one that doesn't go through the center city of downtown, which is where we encounter most of our delays. So it's a real challenge operating the Green Line on time. We received cap and trade funding a few years ago, about $7 million in the TIRCP funding cycle, and that was to improve El Cajon Transit Center. We built a third track out there. It was really to help operational efficiencies. You see some pictures on the slide there. The one in the upper right is the extension of a new platform, and then the lower one is a new track that will ultimately connect to the two existing tracks that you see there. Construction started in October 2022, and we're expected to finish in the next few months in this fall. So given all that, our proposal is to establish a new line, the copper line. We terminate the green and orange lines at El Cajon rather than Santee and Arnell, you see respectively. The green line goes out to Santee, the orange line goes one more station beyond El Cajon to Arnell Avenue Station. We'd establish a new copper line and serve El Cajon, Arnell, Gillespie Field, and Santee. We'd operate it at 15-minute frequencies for the bulk of the day, basically matching the Green Line frequencies of Santee now. We'd maintain the current span of service, and we'd operate one-car consists. What that means is most of the trolleys that you see out there in the systems, particularly all the ones downtown, are three-car trains. It's three trains coupled together. We'd operate one-car trains. We have enough capacity to handle the forecasted passengers out there with one-car train. Saves a lot of miles and a lot of time. We'd always have the capacity to increase the car size or the train size if we saw the demand to do so. So the proposal is all three lines have dedicated platforms at El Cajon. You see a little schematic there, very convenient transfer. All transfers would be scheduled within 4 to 9 minutes. There's 4 possible transfers out there. You have the orange line east to the copper line east, the green line east to the copper line east, and conversely, copper line west to each of the green and orange line west. So all those transfers would be scheduled within 4 to 9 minutes. That gives you enough time to get from one train to another, accounting for any minimal delays, and but it's not too exorbitant of a delay. We're also proposing additional improvements for Sunday. Right now, the green line on Sunday, half of the trains turn around at San Diego State. So on the 15-minute service, from here to San Diego State is every 15, but from San Diego State out to Santee is only every 30 minutes. We're proposing to make that a 15-minute service out to East County permanently. We basically match the Sunday schedule to the existing Saturday schedule. We'd also do that on the orange line, and what that means is a little bit of expanded span on the orange line. It'd operate about an hour later than it does now on Sundays. It would also have a number of extra trips in the morning, because again, we'd match the Saturday schedule with Sunday. Ultimately, we'd have a trolley weekday schedule and a weekend schedule rather than what we have now, which is a weekday, Saturday, and Sunday schedule. Then also Santee itself would get more service because again, on Sundays, half the green lines turn at San Diego State. So on Sundays, they're only getting half-hour service at Santee trolley station. Now they'll have it every 15 minutes. So we see that as a big improvement. The anticipated benefits is a improved reliability for a vast majority of trolley passengers. You see a chart here. What you're looking at is an eastbound average day on the green line. The dark green lines are the boardings and the light ones are the people getting off. And you're looking at an eastbound trip. So on the far left is 12th Imperial, on the far right is Santee. And the black line above is the through passengers. So you can see that the bulk of the passengers are on the western part of the alignment, and they're going to be the big beneficiaries of this project. On the far right, you see the red line there, and that's the proposed new copper line. It would be from that line to the right. Overall, we estimate there will be a transfer involved for some passengers, the ones that are going from west of El Cajon to east of El Cajon. We estimate on the current green line, that's about 8% of our passengers. So 92% of the passengers would see the improved reliability. 8% would have the small transfer at El Cajon. Orange line, right now, about 6% of the people are transferring, and those are the people that are going to our now. And actually, a portion of those 6% are probably people that are going to Santee ultimately. They're already transferring to the green line. The way our system is built is all of the lines are interchanged with one another. So the green line overlaps the orange line in East County. It overlaps the blue line between downtown and Old Town. And the orange line overlaps the blue line in downtown. So they're all interlinked. So any change that you make on one line has similar impacts on other lines, either positive or negative. So anything that we can improve the reliability on the green line will have impacts on the orange line and further down the route, further down the network on the blue line. The blue line will realize lower benefits than the green line, of course, but there will be some benefits. So all told, of the trolley passengers, we estimate about 3% of them will have a transfer, about 97% of them will see a benefit from this project. So we have the improved reliability. We estimate a operational cost savings despite an overall increase in service, and that's because we're saving significant car miles. The distance between El Cajon to Santee is about 4 miles, and we do that 140 times a day, and now we're operating 1-car trains instead of 3-car trains. So significant savings on maintenance, electricity usage, all that kind of stuff. Reduce travel times through intersections along Cuyamaca Street due to shorter consists. Again, the 1-car trains instead of the 3-car trains. We talked about the improved break times for trolley operators. Right now on the green line, again, it's more than an hour trip out to Santee. They have a 6-minute layover at best before they make an hour trip back. Now they'll have a 12-minute layover at El Cajon off of basically like a 55-minute trip out there. So much improved working conditions for our trolley operators and much improved chance that they'll be able to make their westbound trip on time. And finally, we're proposing a break room facility. We're not proposing, we're going to build a break room facility for MTS personnel at El Cajon. So all of a sudden, we're going to have 3 lines terminating there. We're going to have a break facility for the operators. They'll have a restroom. Nice place to take a break, and that'll be built over the next couple months. In terms of public outreach, we had 5 events in El Cajon and Santee, and for the most part, we got overwhelmingly positive comments. We're also accepting comments online, and through yesterday, we received 118. The majority were positive, about 23% were neutral, and about a quarter of them opposed the proposal. And that was mostly citing the transfer at El Cajon, which I think people are imagining it's going to be a worse transfer than it will be, or security concerns at El Cajon. And again, we're going to have a lot more eyes on El Cajon if this project gets implemented, because we'll have the termination of 3 lines, we'll security out there and line supervisors and such. We've also been coordinating with the elected officials and the staff of El Cajon and Santee on this project for the last couple of years. And I'll turn it over to Dennis to talk about the service equity analysis.
Good morning. MTS Board Policy 42 is our guidance on service changes and has a definition in there for a major service change. There's several criteria that make a service change to be a major service change. One of those is a new implementation of a new line. So while we're looking at the overall service levels are not going to be significantly different, nor are we introducing any new segment on the trolley. It is technically a new line. We'll go from 3 trolley lines to 4 trolley lines. So under policy 42, this change is considered a major service change. So we're going through the major service change process, which includes today's public hearing. It also includes a service equity analysis. This is a requirement for us to comply with the Federal Transit Administration's guidance on Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. There was a draft that was attached to the original item of that service equity analysis. There are some revisions and updates needed to that draft. So we've changed the recommendation today not to have you receive that report, but rather to bring that back at a future board meeting. And also, we are not going to ask you to approve this today. The recommendation will come back at that future board meeting along with that revised service equity analysis. We also had a late comment that came through yesterday afternoon with some comments on our service equity analysis. So we will take a look at that and take that into consideration as we make those revisions to that equity analysis. So our staff recommendation today is to open the public hearing, receive public testimony, and then receive feedback from the board to staff before we bring this back at a future meeting for, again, that Title VI service equity analysis, as well as a recommendation to approve the copper line implementation.
Thank you, Mr. Desmond. Thank you, Mr. Boyd. The public hearing is open. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. We have several. Mary Davis, please make your way to the podium.
Do I have 2 minutes? Hi, good morning. Mary Davis here to formally protest your new copper line. What I have seen is that you have underinvested in East County by not originally double tracking, and now you want to underinvest in them again. My complaints against the copper line are many, but I will start with the crux: regional and systemic inequity. East County is yet again getting the short end of a policy-making stick. We have historically and now continue to be treated far differently than other regions in the county, getting the resource-depleted dregs and left holding the bag for policies that would never fly in other parts of the county. For the record, I filed a formal Title VI complaint yesterday regarding your deficient services equity analysis. It is defective on many levels, but two of the most glaring are the failure to include the MENA, Middle Eastern North African population, and then also to the failure for the adverse health impacts, lack of any consideration towards health and human environmental justice impacts, failing to include public safety in that consideration. I must now ask, what are your mitigation measures? I put that at the front and center. This move will save the overall system money, but the real equity question is, how much of those savings are you going to reinvest back to the community and the neighbors that you are impacting? Your plan creates a new level of risk for riders, and you must absolutely mitigate that
30 seconds left.
Via a robust security action plan and investment. I would also like you to abide by your policy, not fast track it for Board Policy 42. Bring that back in a year. Without mitigation measures and investment, your analysis of the copper line is deficient. No to the copper line as it stands. Thank you.
Next is phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
You know what I imagine is Brent fired for being out of touch with the reality of infrequent trolleys. Fact one, the tracks between Gillespie and Santee could be double tracked to increase speed rather than cutting service. Number two, the orange line could be extended to Santee to end all transfers from El Cajon. Number three, one trolley car will never work when there's Padres games, Comic-Con, or other major events. Number four, the copper line will add 30 minutes to 1 hour on the people's round trips. Number five, MTS propaganda given to NBC7 was obvious when their script used the word we. Number six, the alternatives for low-income people amounted to, we're cutting your service with the copper line. Good luck. Question one, how many more GHGs because people choose to drive 15 minutes instead of waiting 15 minutes for a transfer? Number two, what trolley driver wants to go insane driving back and forth on a 5-minute route all day? Number three, what would happen if this single trolley car was dirty or there was a maniac on board? People wouldn't have another 2 cars to move to. Number four, why did MTS staff's potential burdens leave out people's security concerns? Number five, why would there not be a 12-month trial period to gather real data on the effects upon riders, the system, and the environment? How could 31% of people surveyed with no opinion be considered extensive community input? Number six, how would people with groceries, disabilities, or the elderly benefit from another transfer? Number seven, what equity? Is this because of a racist assumption that everyone going to or from Arnell, Gillespie, and Santee are white and so don't matter? The news just said there's 34 different languages spoken within the Santee School District. MTS's data is from
30
3 years
seconds
ago
left.
and doesn't even count the new MENA communities. And MTS's statistical analysis says, quote, there could be a disproportionate burden to low-income populations to result from the copper line, far higher than the system-wide average, end quote. It is inequity personified to harm the 3 to 8% of Green Line users that would now require an extra cross-platform time transfer in El Cajon. That means less sleep, more walking, less security, and more unknown time away from home. And it's already been built.
Your
Admitted
time
on
has
page
expired. The original DRA, please unmute yourself though.
Well, it's crazy the things that you guys do to try and make things better. I don't know why you would go from 3 cars to 1. And if that's going in an area where there's going to be an influx in people, is that, going to cause more problems? But obviously, if you have all of the lines are connected and they impact each other, then everything that you do is going to be impacting the people's ability to get to where they need to go. And it's a little bit interesting that you're wanting to put break room facilities finally, and that they should be around over the next couple of months. But I'm wondering, how long are they even going to be spending in this type of facility? Maybe just having a bathroom and just a place to sit down might be nice for them because, basically they're just having porta potties that they got to, go and use and unlock because they're locked while they're, just sitting there so that nobody else can use them. And then would that be something that the people could also use, or is it just going to be for the workers, which they need just so that they can be able to do their job, but also so do the people when you want them to ride all of this transit, and wait around and have you'll even have concessions and stuff like that. It's going to make people have to use the bathroom more, but I feel like we're not even trying to provide that kind of stuff. But you can't even have the transit run in a manner that, people want to ride it. Like you have less and less people
30 seconds
riding.
left.
And, you do all of these things to potentially, mitigate stuff, but you're leaving people behind, as the previous speakers have been telling you. So it's just interesting to see how you guys do things, what you spend money on, what you don't. Yeah, you should be providing bathrooms already. It shouldn't be something that, people have to wait on, especially if you want them to take this kind of transit. It's just
Your time has expired. That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. We will close the public hearing and we will open board discussion on this item, and we will begin with Vice Chair Goebel.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for a nice, thorough presentation. I appreciate your work on this. El Cajon certainly is the center of this because it's where the third track starts and ends for the copper line. And we want to be a partner for the whole system, for all the communities in our system to improve the reliability, to improve the safety throughout the system. So we're certainly glad to be a part of the team that does that. At the same time, this does open up some new conditions specifically for El Cajon and for the other cities, Santee as well. As the public speaker mentioned, we do have, now you have to get off of a trolley and to get onto the copper line. This does introduce a new condition of a person being anxious of their surroundings, especially after dark. And we know in the winter months, that can be starting at 5 o'clock. So this introduces a new condition of anxieties for our riders. I think we're just asking if we're saving $1 million on this for the system, that some of that come back to increased security in El Cajon presence, more than what we have today, to release that anxiety for those that might be experiencing having to travel. My second point related to safety is we're now introducing, with the transfer getting off of a trolley onto the copper line, we now have people crossing the tracks if they're on the one of the platform, I'll say the westbound platform to get to the eastbound platform of the copper line. We will probably have people crossing the tracks. And that does introduce a new condition where we have seen people tragically suffer injury and worse as a result of crossing tracks. So we would look for safety treatments similar to what intersections have, where they have a bar that says no pedestrian crossing here. You have to go back to another approved crossing, or some kind of thing that addresses the condition of people having to cross the tracks to get to the copper line. Those are my two issues of safety. For the system, this is great. We're just asking for a little more than what we have today to reduce the anxiety of those who might feel it as a result of having to transfer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goebel. Director Hall.
As far as this goes, I'm actually in favor of this, mainly because the idea here is protecting the system. We want better service overall in the system. You know, we're saving $1 million. Yes, it's going to be a little inconvenient for people. But the reality is I would like to see more than one car, frankly, but I think we could start with 2 cars and then maybe work our way back if necessary. I do know that I don't have any figures on the actual amount of people actually ride it on a daily basis. It would be nice to be able to see that, but I know it's or was it there, I guess? Yeah, I couldn't read that. I'm sorry. I'm talking about Santee to El Cajon, period.
Oh, sorry. Open it right there. So between Santee and El Cajon, there's recently about 900 people riding just between Santee and El Cajon. So they would those passengers would see a benefit because they're just going from Santee to El Cajon.
Right.
Right. And then anybody from El Cajon West is also seeing a benefit.
Right.
The ones that have the transfers are the ones that are going from Santee beyond El Cajon.
Right.
So to Mission Valley, San Diego State. And that's about 2,000 or so.
Okay, so I guess my concern is we're losing time, which I'm okay with. Now we're gonna make up that time. We're actually benefiting in Santee because rather than sitting around for 30 minutes, now we're going 15 minutes. We're saving MTS $1 million. So Santee is doing our part on that. We're helping out. Yes, it's gonna be a little troublesome to get off and get on, but I think we can handle that. I think we're, capable of doing that. But I have the same concerns as Councilman Goebel is the safety is a concern everywhere. We've hired extra security officers. Yesterday, and I've told Sharon this and Jim, yesterday we had, I did a ride along for 9 hours and three times within a 3-hour period, we were at that trolley station. And it was basically, one was a major problem because we did have we had to get 9 officers there to help out. It was actually, overkill, but Santee does overkill when necessary. But the reality is the sheriffs did a great job. Another one was simply somebody had a big walking cane and was kind of swerving it around and the call went in. Trolley security did not show up during that. And I keep hearing the same thing that, well, we're spread out all over. Well, we're going to give up, El Cajon and Santee are giving up $1 million. We want to see somebody there. We would like to see somebody full-time riding that train back and forth. And we're doing our part to help out. We would like some help there too. When they're calling the security department and nobody shows up, that's a problem. So that's my only concern. Other than that, I'm completely fine with it. I think Santee's looked at it. We had some pushback right when it first came out, but now that it's being explained, I think it's well worth the savings, and we are helping the system, and that's the important part.
Thank you, Director Hall. Any further? Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna make one comment about the crossing the tracks, which is certainly a concern. But I think people will be crossing the tracks much less than imagine. So if you see the platform here, the green line would pull into, that's the eastbound track. And anybody transferring between the green line and the copper line they wouldn't be crossing the tracks, right? So the orange line, they would, that would be a cross track transfer. But for the most part, if you're getting off the orange line will be stopped in the station, right? So you'll be forced to go around either end. So there'll definitely be some track crossing, and that's something that we definitely need to look out for. But I think it'll be a little bit less than we're imagining.
Thank you, Chair. I'm talking about the other end. the westbound. And what you're describing here is the termination point of the orange line and green line. And I agree with you. The orange line car is not going to go any further east towards Santee. So there's no risk
Correct.
of crossing the tracks of
Yep.
either the orange line or the green line there. At the other end,
Yep.
which is the Palm Avenue, I think it is, that's where people could cross the green line track to get to the platform to walk down to the copper line.
Definitely.
That's where I'm saying
Yeah.
maybe you have some kind of no crossing here or some treatment that says this, the green or the orange may take off on you and hit you as you're trying to cross to get to the copper line. That's a new condition that you should address. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brian Riley. I serve as the Chief Operating Officer here. And I do take into consideration everything that you're saying as far as the application, surface application and pedestrian application there at the crossing. The crossing, as Brent mentioned earlier, does not change on the west end of the platform. The application that's there right now for pedestrians to cross, the pedestrian crossings are all State of California Public Utility Commission approved crossings with all the safety applications that are required at that location, which is consistent with the rest of our system and the 62 stations at the on the MTS network. So there's really no change as far as the way pedestrians will actually interact and how they will cross the tracks at El Cajon Station. They'll still, be under the same pedestrian crossings that we currently have there. We already have at that location safety application as far as the bells, the bells and the lights at that location for when a train's actually going to depart out of the station. So prior to them departing from a station, there's a whole process that happens at that location. There's before they leave, the gates are activated. There's lights, which is basically there for the visual. There's also the bells, which is for the hearing at that location, as well as before an operator will actually move a train, they're required by the state of California to use their buzzer horn. So there's a lot of different things that actually happen before they leave out of the station. And nothing really changes as far as the safety and the application for the pedestrian crossings at El Cajon Station.
If I may. I agree with you, Mr. Riley. We certainly want to meet state and federal guidelines. I'm certain you're aware of the fatality recently at the El Cajon Station where a person was trapped under a train and the driver didn't see that person crossing the tracks. They crossed in a blind spot and still tragically ended up losing their life because of that. I'm just asking you to reconsider going beyond state and federal requirements to avoid this person who recently lost their life, to look at it again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Riley. Thank you, Vice Chair Goebel. Any further discussion on this item? Director Elo Rivera.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly defer to my East County colleagues on kind of the operational benefits and potential red flags to keep in mind on this. I have a question about how MTS partnered or did not partner with Sandag in the planning for this line. I just want to kind of understand how the two agencies work together, when they work together, when they don't. As far as I understand, this is not in the regional plan, and want to make sure that we're utilizing all of the resources we possibly can. Yeah.
I guess I could defer to Dennis to talk about the difference between our operational planning and the regional.
Yeah, I think there's a division in what Sandag does and what we do. For the most part, Sandag leaves short-range operational decisions to MTS, headways, routing, that kind of thing. And then whatever changes we make are incorporated into their future plans. So when you see the 2025 RTP come out, you'll see the copper line as a separate line if this is approved and goes ahead. So we certainly coordinate with them closely on things like the coordinated plan and our service improvement plan and that kind of thing. But they don't necessarily get involved in the short range planning. We do that here.
Understood. I think the question really is, are we utilizing the potential support of Sandag. So not necessarily asking for their approval or deferring to them on how we could operate, but are we leveraging the resources that could come from Sandag in the planning for something like this, in the outreach for something like this, in the funding for something like this? That's, really what I'm kind of trying to get at.
Yeah, we would if they had an expertise that we wouldn't have. But we have the in-house expertise for this kind of operational planning. And we have sought funding for projects in the past. But for instance, like we didn't have assistance from them for our Irish Rapid. We've taken on certain projects ourselves. And we seek grants as well on our own. So they're much more long-range planners. They also have certain funding from Transnet, which then they are responsible for doing that planning. But they work closely with us to try to understand operationally what the needs are and how things should be planned. They tend to use consultants when they do that for things like Midcoast or the rapids that are included in Transnet. So Dennis, has there been any expertise that you've utilized perhaps in their data collection?
Yeah,
aspect?
exactly. We definitely have tools and resources that Sandag leans on and vice versa. So for example, Sandag right now is completing their 5-year onboard survey. So they did the surveying last year and they're coming out with the report this summer. That includes a massive amount of data that will be really, really helpful for us. And that data feeds into documents, for example, our language assistance plan. So we utilize that. At the same time, we do things like our onboard customer service survey. We provide surveyors that provide the fare information that does the regional fare allocation. So there's a lot of cooperation on a lot of things. So surveying is certainly one of those things. They have information that we don't have and we have information that they don't have. And that feeds into their long-range plans, and then their information helps us make our short-range plans.
Understood. I guess the only request I'll make is if we can, especially with a new CEO coming on board, who I believe you know quite well, Sharon, and have a long standing relationship with, I think there's a lot of interest in making sure that we're collaborating. I certainly, as an MTS board member, want to make sure that we're maximizing all opportunities to either lessen the burden or, share responsibilities with other agencies that could potentially be supporting some of our work. I will add that there's a lot of conversation at the Sandag board level about improving access to transit in East County. I think, and I've stated wearing that hat that I'm totally supportive of that. And so what we could find is a motivated partner to step in and not necessarily provide support that's needed, but could be useful. And I don't see the downside there. So appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I'm glad to hear that my colleagues on the East County, I believe, think it's going to be beneficial in the long run. And I'm glad to see that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Ela Rivera. All right, seeing no further discussion on this item, we will look forward to it coming back for action at a future board meeting. Clerk?
Chair, do we have a first and second?
This is not an action item today. We'll bring it back for action at a future meeting.
Okay.
Thank you for double checking on that, though. All right, that'll bring us to our discussion and report items, beginning with item 22, which is the Fare Enforcement Diversion Program modifications. And we are going to turn it over to Karen Landers for the presentation on this item once she gets set up. And once you're up there and ready to begin, feel free to begin your presentation.
I'll just mention that this is going to be a very dense report, a lot of data. This was a request of our Public Security Committee that we have a very data-driven process. And so that's what Karen's going to present to you and can certainly answer any in-depth questions on that as well.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. As Sharon said, it's going to be a little dense. I'm going to try to not take too long, but also to not talk too fast for you all. One of the things that I did tell the Public Security Committee where we gave part of this presentation to was, while I'm giving the presentation, I've worked very closely with our finance department and our security department to double check the data and make sure that what we're presenting to you is accurate. So it's not the lawyer doing all of the analysis. I had the experts feed into that. I just want that to be clear. So for some of our newer members or that haven't seen the details of the pilot program, the diversion program in a while, I just wanted to walk through it. It is something that our board approved in 2020. It went into effect in September. And it was intended to address some, civil justice goals that we had, give some alternatives to going straight to court and having, essentially like a criminal record related to fare evasion. And so what the board at that time did is that all fare evasion violations are eligible unless another violation was also cited. So if the person was committing vandalism, assault, or failure to comply, in addition to having a fare evasion ticket, then they're not eligible for diversion. But if your only thing that you're cited for is fare evasion, then you are eligible. And the current options under that program are you can either, when you're inspected and found to not have a fare on your card, you can immediately purchase a one-way ticket. I have in here the $2.50 one-way ticket. There are obviously other passes like a senior disabled Medicare that has a slightly lower cost for a one-way fare, and then some other ones that are a little bit higher. But essentially, most people have to purchase a $2.50 one-way ticket either at a vending machine at the station or on the Pronto validation app. The other alternative is if you don't pay that fare immediately, you can receive an MTS citation. And then as part of our diversion program, you get the citation, but MTS keeps it here. It never goes to court. It never enters into any system. If within 120 days, you either pay a $25 fine, you complete 3 hours of community service, you have 15 days to appeal if you think that you were issued the citation invalidly. If there was something that was ticket vending machine wasn't working or wasn't reading your card right, then we will investigate that. And if after 120 days you haven't done any of those things, then we send the citation to court and it goes through that normal process. Again, one of the main policy goals that were behind the diversion program at the time was to address the reduction in fare revenues that could result in kind of a significant budget deficit. So right here today, what we're talking about is we want to address I'm sorry, I got completely twisted up, that our policy goals today are to address our fare revenues and that we are having a significant budget deficit because of that. And we don't want to have to do service cuts or raise fares if not possible. And so that's something we're keeping in mind. But the goals of the diversion program, we're hoping to keep in place an incentive for riders to pay their transit fare in advance. We don't want to increase the number of riders that are deciding that they'll risk it and ride without a fare. And so making sure that the diversion program still has that incentive, but we definitely want a non-criminal path for resolving that citation. And we wanted to more equitably and proportionally align the penalty of fare evasion with the actual violation. And so that's what we're trying to develop the program to address. As I said before, we feel that the program, even with the recommendation at the end of this presentation, meets the MTS's civil justice goals. So it provides a non-criminal path for individuals to resolve the fare citation, and the penalty is more aligned with that violation. So you have 4 months to resolve it before it gets sent to court. So if people don't have the $25 for the fine right away, they have time to come up with it. That $25 fine is significantly reduced from the fees that are imposed at court. If it goes to the court system, the court adds a different fines on top of it, and it is generally over $192 or more. We also provide the community service option for individuals who don't have the means to pay that reduced fine. And those 3 hours that we ask is less than if they went through the court process and asked for community service through that. And then the expedited informal appeal process intended, if there really is a factual defense to why somebody shouldn't have gotten that citation, we want to investigate it, correct that, do any training or technical fixes that we may do to try to avoid that type of citation in the future. And then just even if somebody doesn't meet our 120 day timeframe, or they have multiple violations, but they come to MTS and say, I want to resolve these, we do individualized plans where appropriate. So we've had individuals come to us who appear to, finally be willing to address it and say, I have 6 citations, how can I resolve them? And we've worked on individual plans to give them not necessarily 3 hours of community service for each of those violations. We'll work up a reduced plan or something to help them resolve it in an equitable way. Because really, basically what we want is we just want people to pay their fare. We're not looking at the program as punitive, but it's how can we structure it so that most people are incentivized to pay the fare regularly and not risk it. So one of the things when we brought this to the board in the past has been wanting the data to understand what is really the impact and how is this happening. And so this is the dense part. We start with what our fare evasion rate is, which is that tells us what percentage of our passengers are riding without paying their fare. And it's important as we go through this discussion to understand the difference between our old fare system, the Compass card, which was in place until August of 2021, and then the Pronto fare system that was in place starting in October of 2021. In September of that year, we did a free ride month if you switched over to Pronto. So I'm not really counting that. That was kind of a transition month. But under the Compass card system, that fare program encouraged the purchase of passes in advances of rides, because that's the only way you would get your discount. So you would buy a day pass in advance, and then that would cover all your rides for the day. And that was the only way that you would get, if you had multiple trip segments that might end up costing more than $6, if you bought the day pass in advance, then you got that discount. Otherwise, you would just be paying $2.50 for each trip segment that you went along. If you had transfers, you could, in 4 segments in a round trip, you could end up spending $10, or $7.50 for 3. Whereas the Pronto fare system introduced fare capping, which is intended to give riders the benefit of those discounts, but on a pay as you go. And so the system automatically caps what you do. So you put money in your stored value account. And so instead of buying a monthly pass or a day pass, you put money in the stored value. And as you go along, you do your trip segments, and it charges you $2.50. And then it maxes you out. If you've ridden more trips in a day, instead of charging you $7.50, for 3 trip segments that are applied, it'll charge you $6, and then the same thing. It's really most beneficial for a monthly pass, that as you go along, ultimately, if you ride enough days, it'll cap what you spend at that $72.
And if I could add as well, one other change that came in with the Pronto fare system was that we made transfers free, whereas before we charged for transfers.
Yeah. So that's a 2-hour transfer window, that if you have a second trip segment within that 2 hours, then that would be free. But under Pronto, in order for it to work and for MTS to get our fare revenue, you have to tap every trip segment. And so one of the things that we've looked at is, since introduction of Pronto, what is our fare evasion rate? And I just want to highlight the 2 data points that we have determined are the most reliable. Are our special enforcement details. And I guess to go back, really this analysis is applicable on Trolley. So all the data I'm giving you today is really looking at the impacts on Trolley, because on buses, you've got that bus operator kind of as the gatekeeper to make sure that you pay that fare, whereas we don't have that on Trolley. And so this analysis is mostly looking at Trolley. But our special enforcement details are a security detail where officers check every single passenger, and it's a closed environment. So there's not an ability for somebody to avoid inspection. Sometimes people see an officer get on the trolley and they immediately get off and walk away to not get cited. And in our special enforcement details, they can't do that. The other data that we have found very valuable in this analysis is the Pronto inspection and validation app data. And so that is that data that when our officers go and inspect people, in the inspection app, it will tell you, I've looked at your card. Do you have a pass? Do you have any fare? Did you tap? Do you have a valid fare, or is it not valid? If it's not valid, then they switch over to the validation app, for the buy on the spot option that the diversion program has, and then they validate that fare there. And so using that data has really given us a much better sense of what is happening out in the field on a daily basis. And because the sample size is so large, it's every single person that's being inspected or validated. It's a more reliable source than some of the other things that people might see out there. You know, we have similar rider enforcement details on the trolley, but they're not a closed environment. Statistics from our security officers, we have them keep those, but it's manual tallies a lot of time. That's almost on top of the data I'm talking to you about today of people who just walk away, refuse to even have their card checked. And then Sandag does issue some reports that are based on ride check surveys. And that data, recently it looked at and it was saying an 8% fare evasion rate, but that's all voluntary survey data where an individual person rides the trolley and they ask people, how'd you pay your fare today? You know, what type of pass did you use? And of those, 8% say, oh, I didn't have a fare, but that's not verified. It's kind of self-reported. And it's not we don't think it's as reliable as the Pronto inspection data. So what our analysis uses today is the Pronto data and the SED data to kind of cross-check that. And what that data has showed us is that stored value related evasion is increasing. And actually purchases of passes, like monthly passes, is going down. So people are figuring out that they're not going to buy a pass in advance. They're going to do the stored value, and then they're going to see if they get inspected and if they pay. And if they don't get inspected, then maybe they don't even reach the $72 max to like have a pass on their product. So currently the no valid fare for stored value is at 32%. So the data that we're looking at is a 24-month period. So it started in May of 2022 and ended in April of 2024. And that's because starting in May of 2022 is when we really started using those Pronto apps throughout the system on a much larger basis. That data also shows us that only 3 to 5% of passengers are inspected on a monthly basis. So that means more than 95% of our passengers don't get checked like during their trip. And so where we've got now growing from 22% in 2022 to 29% in 2023, and now we're at 32% for the first 4 months of 2024 of fare evasion on the trolley. That same period, the fare evasion on the bus is still steady at 3%. So it's really showing that it's the Pronto on top of the on the trolley where you don't have that gatekeeper. So looking at then historical trends, this is another thing that the Public Security Committee had asked us to kind of present back is our fare evasion rate going back before we switched over to Pronto really hovered in that around 3% rate, both on the trolley and on the bus. And it's only since we switched over to Pronto that it has gone up, and that's where it started in 2022. And one of the more interesting things, if you look at this chart that I have on the screen that is showing the annual trolley ridership versus trolley fare revenue. And historically, we've always been over $1 per ride, you know, of average fare, because that takes into account if people are riding often enough and they're getting these discounts, they're paying, you know, on a pro rata basis about $1 per ride on the trolley. But in 2022, as we're coming out of the pandemic and we're doing all sorts of efforts to increase ridership, we had 34 million passengers and only $28 million in trolley fare revenue. But then in 2023, we increased another 4.4 million passengers on the trolley, but we actually brought in less revenue than the year before. So whereas before we would have expected if we gained 4.4 million passengers that we would also gain about $4.4 million in revenue or a little bit more than that, we actually lost $600,000 in trolley revenue in 2023 when compared to 2022. And so really we think that that is where this is a concerning trend and it's continuing to have significant impact as riders figure out the loophole related to the on-the-spot fare. And really what we're seeing is that if you The only time you're still within our rules right now under the diversion program. You know, we tell people under the rules, you're supposed to tap every trip segment, but we also tell people under the diversion program, hey, if you get inspected and you don't have a fare, it's okay, just pay your fare then. And you're still within the rules. And so people aren't necessarily like doing anything wrong under that program. And then looking at the revenue analysis. So we went back and using data from the Pronto system and the fare evasion rate and our general average fares, we've come up that 24 months between May of 22 and April of 24, we have estimated it's between 14.5 and $19 million of fare revenue that's been lost for people who rode without tapping their fare. And then it's increasing. So for annualized for 2024, we're estimating that it's going to be between a $10 and $13 million loss of fare revenue, like on that annual basis. And then the SED data confirms for 2024, it actually shows a little bit less than what the Pronto data is showing us, but the Pronto data, so that's the 10 mil using the fare evasion rates, like that's why we think it's a range. So we then wanted to look at, well, how many people are doing this and what's the scope of the problem? And so we asked our Pronto team to run a report of how many individual Pronto accounts are using that buy on the spot option and how many have used it more than once. And so that analysis came back that for that 24-month period, over 137,000 individual accounts used the buy on the spot at least once. And almost 53,000 used it more than once. And so for the one-time thing, you have to remember that less than 5% of people are being inspected. But you could assume that was they learned their lesson. They only did it once. It was a mistake. But the 53,000 other individuals are 90% of that fare evasion that we're having. And so it's still a pretty big scale, a pretty big number of individual people that are using that more than once to pay their fare. Another way to look at this was this graph, just to understand where we are historically. So this chart starts back in July of 2019, but the red block is trolley ridership. And then the gray block on top of that is the rest of the system ridership, so bus ridership. And the red line is trolley revenue. And this is what went forward to help us confirm that it's not the fare diversion program itself that created this fare evasion problem. It really is that program got inputted in September of 2020, which is the first line that's marked. And it wasn't until that September of 21, October of 21, when we instituted Pronto, that we really saw this division where the revenue for trolley went significantly down and compared to ridership. So what the data is telling staff is that buy on the spot option in the diversion program, when it was paired with the new Pronto fare capping system, really created a loophole that encourages fare evasion. Because people, again, will only purchase the fare if they're inspected by the MTS officer. If they don't encounter an officer, then they won't purchase that fare by tapping their stored value on the validator. And so again, since 3 to 5% of passengers are inspected, that means we're not receiving that buy on the spot fare from 95% of our riders that are using this system. And again, right now that buy on the spot option is technically part of our fare rules. So I think that even the most rule followers of some of our passengers don't think that they're breaking the rules, you know? And so there's not really an incentive for them to change their behavior. And because we're seeing this use of this loophole increasing, it really seems to show that passengers are, as they understand how Pronto works and how our fare enforcement works, that they're taking advantage of this. It's kind of, I don't know if you've seen kind of TikTok videos of how to hack something, you know, this is a hack on the trolley, you know, system of how to do it. We've gone through a lot of evaluations of the diversion program and concerns with fare evasion. We certainly have done more prior to 2023, but The last time we brought this issue to the board was back in January of 2023. We did have some recent discussions at the Public Security Committee in March and in June. We really just talked about the data and the concerns that at that meeting, the Security Committee did not was not asked to and did not give any recommendations on what we should do with the program. We told them kind of where we were leading, but there's been no recommendation or direction from the Public Security Committee. So that discussion is for today. We did take this issue to the Community Advisory Committee earlier this month as well to give that data, and overall the committee seemed positive that this was a problem that needed to be addressed. So our staff recommendation is that we think that we should remove that on-the-spot payment from the diversion program. But then at the same time, right now, the ways to pay that $25 fine under the diversion program are not as user-friendly. You can either mail a check in or you can come to the transit store. And so our recommendation would be that if we remove on-the-spot payment, that we should make paying that fine as easy as possible, try to align it more with how you can pay a parking ticket or a traffic ticket. So we would implement online and phone payment options to make it easy for someone to immediately pay that $25 fine. You know, even if they wanted to do it right then when they got the citation, they could go on and do that. One thing I did want to talk about, an issue that was just raised and discussed at the Public Security Committee meeting, and has been suggested by others, but it's not part of the staff recommendation today, is, well, what if you kept the on-the-spot payment, but you increased that on-the-spot fine to the $25? And we do have some implementation concerns with that. One, just timing of like the ability to implement that would take long because we would have to reprogram the Pronto apps and make sure that we don't have conflicts with past products and stored value. But that potentially would delay our open payment efforts that we're doing. And then it would delay being able to implement this and stop this fare evasion of up to $1 million a month that we are potentially using. But we also more concerned, the point of the diversion program at first, some of our civil justice goals was to reduce these penalties, but also provide a de-escalation opportunity for our officers. So if you get the citation, it's like, I'm going to have to give you a citation, but here are a lot of ways that you can resolve this and we'll never send this to court. And if we immediately are saying we're going to take $25 out of your stored value balance right now, we're concerned that that might have some additional escalation and conflict with the officers. And we also, many of our passengers don't have $25 on their stored value balance. We went and looked, and the average stored value balance is under $10. So most people wouldn't be able to take advantage of that. And we're hoping that adding the online and phone payment options to the diversion program would kind of be a viable alternative to that on-the-spot payment, because it would act the same way. If you wanted to pay it right away, resolve it, not have to worry about it, you could do that, but you would just pay through a different method. There had been some other questions about what happens with the stored value, because people might put money on their account, but we aren't allowed to recognize that revenue until they tap and pay it. Until then, it's basically a liability, a debt that we owe to give them rides. And so we went back and talked to our finance department in response to some questions that we got at the Public Security Committee of, well, can we recognize that? And the answer is no. Under the generally accepted accounting principles, we're not allowed to recognize our unearned stored value. So it acts a little bit like a gift card, that they don't spend it until it's tapped. And so we're required to hold that revenue on our balance sheet for those future services. If we did recognize it early, it also could be seen as like a misrepresentation of our ridership and revenue and average fare, because we don't actually have riders that go with that revenue that we're recognizing. One exception that we're exploring, that making sure that we follow the rules before we do it, is that once the stored value on a card, if a card has not been tapped at all for over 3 years, there is a point where an agency could say, it's highly unlikely they're ever going to use it, and so we're going to recognize that revenue. And so the first opportunity to do that here would be September or October, because that would be 3 years after we implemented Pronto. And right now, the fiscal year 25 budget includes an estimate of about $1 million that would be recognized if we did that. But that's not we would still owe those rides, and so it's not a significant of just recognize the stored value and then we can do it. We have about $8 million right now that is in that balance sheet for stored value that's on people's cards, but that's rides that we owe and we recognize it according to the GAAP rules. So with that, that is my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do. Manny Rodriguez, please make your way to the podium.
Good afternoon. Thank you. The staff report shows that fare diversion spiked after the implementation of Pronto, not a year prior when the fare diversion program was implemented. This is an indication that the user accessibility issues of Pronto really limit people's ability to pay. I've discussed some of those issues in my previous comments today, but those are just for me as a young, physically able professional. For someone whose first language is not English, for someone who has physical disabilities, or for someone who is a senior and just doesn't quite understand how to use the Pronto system, the accessibility challenges are even greater. RideSD hosted a workshop at the Main Game Museum with dozens of design professionals in which they reviewed the Pronto system, and they overwhelmingly found that it had significantly grave user accessibility issues. The feedback from that workshop was shared with the relevant MTS staff. So with all that in mind, I ask you all to reduce fare diversion by improving the Pronto system and not by diminishing the fare diversion program. Thank you very much.
Phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
For option 4, how could someone even prove that a ticket machine malfunction? I'm against removing option 1 for somebody to immediately pay for their trip. Why not? To instill more fear and more poverty with $25 citations? Here's an alternative. Transit enforcement could instead collect a one-day pass instead of just a one-way fare. And then MTS wouldn't have to worry about that same rider for the rest of the day. It could be considered a penalty since MTS couldn't know for sure how many times someone's already ridden without a fare. And once again, if MTS can't get their house in order when it comes to safety, frequencies, and even cut service, why should anybody pay? What's the hack to be on time or to have a trip be shorter with an extra transfer or to find a restroom while waiting longer or to be safe? I even heard a guy on a trolley recently say he experienced MTS transit security collecting fares on people's way out of the park and market station with the aid of cops. He said, quote, "It's the end of the month to meet quotas. They'll do anything to get money," end quote. See, this is how people see MTS, not in a positive light. They don't feel like customers. MTS makes them feel like numbers and victims. So a diversion program with a day pass collection is a good compromise, especially for those who may simply forget to tap before boarding. There are many times people are in a rush to catch a rare, on time, or available only every 30 minutes trolley or bus. But let's say you change this program today and eliminate option 1 to pay the fare on the spot. Would MTS be alerting riders of this new policy? Doubt it. No one's even been told of cut service changes coming. And question, if you guys running this show are so smart, why did you create a system with a loophole that increased fare evasion by 27%? Blame Pronto, but unaccompanied children are now riding for free, and the data proves that created lost revenue in 2022. And when they grow up riding for free, they're not going to want to pay as adults. And that has always been the agenda, socialist welfare transit. How about when illegal migrants pay, then we'll talk.
Your time has expired. The original DRA, please unmute yourself now.
This reminds me of the $875,000 settlement the city San Diego had to pay a family because a woman got a smoking ticket at a transit center and died in police custody because she couldn't pay the fine. And it's like, you guys sit here and you have all these people that you allow to ride for free, like the kids, but the illegals that are being dropped off, and yes, they committed a federal offense, and they're being dropped off on the streets at Iris and told that they can ride for free. So I guarantee you're not going to any of them trying to get a $25 fine, have them do community service, purchase even a ticket. So it's ridiculous that you'll sit here and on one hand, like say that you want to, make sure all these people are paying, even though you've changed your process and the way that people do it. Then you're saying you want them to tap it every time if they're having a day pass. Like, that's pretty ridiculous because you could forget like oh gosh, I got to keep going. It should be something that you guys have that's, consistent, but it's pretty ridiculous to think about how it's not equitable because you're going to come after the people in the community. I mean, the homeless people can't even go and ride the trolley or the train or whatever, anything, any kind of transit. And so just to think that, you're going to allow such like a certain class of individuals go and do that without having anything and then bitch and moan about having less
30
money.
seconds left.
You're the reason why is because you're allowing this kind of stuff to take place. And then you're punishing other people who, actually live in the community. But it's like, if you don't, then you can come in and ride and that's fine. I just think about like, again, that lady who died in police custody for not being able to pay a ticket. Like, that's really sad to have to like leave somebody motherless because they can't afford a ticket for smoking. And so it's like, how many people
Your
are
time has
like,
expired. Connor Proctor, please unmute yourself now.
Hi, my name is Connor Proctor, and I'd like to say that I think this is a fair proposal, no pun intended. The Pronto system was a great improvement over the previous system, and fare capping is great, and a few transfers are great. So these are all great things, but $15 million is a lot of money that could be used to provide better service. We want people who are capable of paying fares to actually pay the fare. But if the only punishment for evasion is to pay the fare, then of course people will realize that there's no reason to pay unless you get checked. And I would expect this problem to get worse over time as more and more people realize that you can just buy the fare on the spot. A $25 fine is small, cheaper than most other transit agencies. And given that 1 in 20 riders are checked, it's still cheaper on average to try to evade. But a $25 fare should do a lot to keep most people honest because it'll be easier to be honest than to have to deal with the citation. So this is a good step, I think. It's also great that there's still non-monetary options in the diversion program and that this proposal adds the option to pay online and via phone. This proposal just seems like common sense. Thank you.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. We will now open board discussion on this item with Vice Chair Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for a very thorough presentation. Always a lot of numbers helps just clarify what everybody's thinking. So that is very helpful. I remember in the days of Compass, I could take my card and just tap at a reader at the door of the trolley. And am I remembering that right? No?
I don't believe that.
Then I was imagining tapping something at the door of the trolley. It could have been another city. It could have been. Okay, so I think we've talked as a board, the tap points have been a pain point for us in the past. I would like to offer a suggestion. If we have $8 million in stored revenue, if you were to invest $8 million at today's rates at 4%, you would get $320,000 in interest revenue each year. We know we earn interest revenue on cash. That $320,000 could be used to purchase more tap pedestals at stations, making them more visible. That's part of the problem is people don't know always where to tap. And I think we talked about delaying some of these things till we had an open payment option in place before we started further enforcement. But and the question that I have is 3 to 5% of fares are checked. How is that going to change with the new CCIs the board approved? What does that number expect to go from 3 to 5% up to what?
I'm not sure if there's, but I mean, at the most, I would expect it to double. So 6 to 10%, it's not going to go significantly over.
You can go ahead and let Tim.
Go, Tim.
Yeah, we expect that this coming this week, we start.
Sorry, Tim, can you introduce yourself because of the online? You need to introduce
Sure, do you
yourself.
want to come right here, Tim? You can.
Right again. I'm Tim Kern. I'm the Director of Transit Security and Passenger Safety. Great question. With our increased staffing right now, last year when it was approved, we're going to add about 34 CCI positions. We're about a third of the way there right now. This next fiscal year, we expect to increase our fare checks by at least 10%. That's our goal for the first year, and probably significantly after that.
Does that mean increasing 3% to 3.3% or from 3% to 10%?
Well, I think we're checking about 5% of our riders now. So I would expect it to go up to hopefully 15%.
Oh, okay. So significant. That
Yes,
would be.
once we're fully hired, yes, sir.
Of course.
Add the 34 new CCI positions.
Okay. I think we do have an issue with not enough tap pedestals visible to people to know where to tap, especially a lot of people just get there and run on a train. And I think Councilman Ivy, you talked about a tap point on the train itself at one point. So we need more tap pedestals to be fair to those that aren't tapping. That's what I'm saying.
Oh.
And the interest revenue and the stored value may be one way to fund that. Thank you.
And we can, we are revisiting that. We are looking for places that we can put more of the validators on. You know, if you don't find your parking, the box where you have to pay for your parking, I mean, it's not inconsistent that you still get charged your parking fee in the cities that have those boxes. We're just trying to, we keep it low because we understand that our patrons are much more income restricted than people who actually have access to a car. So.
And I do know that the capital projects team, we're looking at each stations and where our next places where we can add. So, since the board raised those issues, I'm sorry I didn't bring the stats with me today, but we have added significantly to the number of validators at stations. And I think we recognize that we could do more. They're not a simple project. You have to run a fiber line to connect them. And so it's not so easy to just buy 100 validators and have somebody in a day go out and bolt them out there. But our capital projects team is looking at.
Karen, we have Israel can speak to it.
Good morning. My name is Israel Maldonado. I'm the Director for Technology and Operations. And Karen's correct. We are looking at multiple stations. And I think for this round, it is going to also be important to get input from community groups, just like RightSD, as to where they see some of these pain points so that we can add additional hardware. I think also, I just returned from a conference in Chicago with several agencies talking about all sorts of topics from open payment to fare evasion. And one of the aspects that all the agencies from New York, New Jersey, even California discussed, there was a common trend was there needs to be also policy that allows the fare evasion problem to be mitigated. With technology, we can do lots of things, but there also has to be some policy tied to that. That was the takeaway from that meeting.
All right, let's move on then. With thanks to Vice Chair Goebel, we'll go to Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp.
Thank you so much, Chair. Just wanted to follow up briefly. What has been done at the stations to improve the accessibility of tapping so far?
Israel. Pronto system implementation. We did an analysis of over 30 key stations and resulted in an additional 180 validators from the prior Compass timeframe. It was right around $1 million of investment between construction and all the conduit, necessary communications infrastructure to support new validators. That's what we did then. We also added the TVM validation capabilities. So in essence, it turned all of those ticket vending machines, which is right around 180 as additional points of validation. And those have been the major efforts we have done since.
And those all have been.
Also the advertising, not the advertising.
But just
the
one,
signage.
just so I'm clear on this part, they all have been added so far at 180 additional validation centers from what we had Compass. They have.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I'm sorry, Chair, go ahead.
I also wanted to highlight the board asked us to do a lot better signage program. And so we did put the flags on the validators. We put stickers at every door so that people, before they board, see that they have to validate in order to get on board. I'm missing some of the places where the signage is as well. On the major boards, we have signage saying that you have to tap. Am I missing some of the aspects of the signage?
I think even screensavers and the ticket vending machines, just an all-around effort.
Oh, yeah, and it's on the app that, what do you call it when it floats on there?
That's right, the in-app messaging alerts.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay. All right. I want to thank you, Karen, for this presentation and all of the staff members that were a part of gathering the data that we were asking for in the Public Security Committee. Just want to emphasize, though, that it did not come to the Public Security Committee as an action item. So these are not necessarily recommendations from the Public Security Committee. And I do want to be clear on that because from my understanding, that's not the way it is normally done. And we have committees so that committees can flesh out and provide recommendations to the full board. That is not the case with with these recommendations. What did the Community Advisory Committee, what was there, any feedback from them? I believe it also came to them in the same sort of information kind of way.
Yes, thank you, Mark Olson, Director of Marketing and Communications here at MTS. We did host the Community Advisory Committee. We asked them a few different questions about this. We talked about, is fair enforcement important to the financial health and operations? About 86% agreed, that it was important to it. We asked them about eliminating the on-the-spot payment. We had about 60% agree with doing that, 40% didn't. I think overall there was a sentiment there to change the fair diversion program to increase compliance. So those were the main takeaways that we got from the group on this topic.
Okay, and that they were given this entire presentation as well. How did that roll out?
Karen gave the presentation.
Okay, and then you polled them afterwards? Is that what happened? Okay, all right, thank you very much. And I think some of that was sentiment with regard to the Security Committee meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago. I do want to emphasize that I'm glad that staff came back with the data because it's not just the fair diversion program. It's pronto. It's the fact that we are dealing with the stored value option, which we have 8 million kind of there that we cannot count toward our revenues because it's stored, right? These are all things that I think from the very beginning, there was not until we requested it. We were very quick, I think, to blame it on one particular thing. And that is not the case. It's a lot of different things that are impacting that bottom line that we see. So from the last presentation we had from the budget, I just want to be clear that 8 million, where does that land? Is that suspended somewhere like in a cloud? And it's not on our books? Where is that? Where is that reflected?
I'll let Larry answer this.
Thank you. Larry Baranese, Chief Financial Officer at MTS. The $8 million is sitting on the balance sheet. It is a liability. It is a liability for MTS to either refund the money or to provide those trips going forward. So it, as a generally accepted GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, it's a requirement for us not to recognize those revenues, but to have those sit on the balance sheet.
Okay,
And
so
it's
that.
not- yeah, it's not in the budget as an operating revenue.
Okay, okay. So then the concerning trends, which I believe, I agree are concerning, right? I agree, there's no doubt about that. But when we talk about having more ridership with less revenue than in 2023 than we did in 2022, there is $8 million that people have purchased, and in our previous system, we would have been able to use that as revenue because we were not in the stored value. We did not have the stored value option.
We did have stored value option with the previous system as well. So we had a stored value module, and from an accounting perspective, it was the exact same practice.
Okay, okay, but there are less monthly passes being purchased now than there were then.
Yes.
That's correct.
And so with the monthly passes, those were included in revenue for MTS.
Correct,
Okay.
because that was a product that they could buy that gave them unlimited usage for that specific month.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much for that additional analysis. I'm just trying to be quick, y'all, but this is a lot. If the recommendations were to pass, if a majority of the board were to vote for the recommendations today, when would this, when would that option be taken off the table? When would this be implemented?
I would hope by September, but we would want to have the online and phone payment options in place. We would also want to start doing some messaging, to let people know that, the on-the-spot option would be being eliminated so that there would be kind of an educational period, leading up to that. So I think the goal would be September, assuming that we wouldn't want to implement it without those online and phone payment options in place.
Okay, and okay. I'm still very conflicted about that first recommendation. One, from a procedural standpoint, where I do feel that, and it partly is my fault for not demanding that this be brought to the committee as an action item, which I think would be appropriate procedure. So that part of it is bothering me. I do want to make it clear from this point on, I will be bringing the APTA recommendation that we had to the Public Security Committee for the committee to explore a civil option on citations. That is something that was recommended by APTA when we were revamping our system. We have some new board members that weren't here at that time. We were revamping our system. And after the peer review, they came and did a thorough analysis of our system, and they recommended that we do a civil process for these citations overall. The diversion program was a sort of a compromise between that civil process and what we had on the books at that time. So I will be bringing that forward to get the committee's feedback and to ask the committee to vote up or down on whether we should have a program like that, especially if this passes today. I think one of my main focuses and one of my main drivers and motivation for advocating for the fair diversion program was that we were hearing from people who were unsheltered and people who were homeless that trolley tickets were preventing them from finally being able to rent a place because they were on their records. And so I certainly didn't want to be a part of what is a perpetuated cycle of poverty when people are trying to do better for themselves. And I think that the civil process, although it, whatever we come forward with and recommend could help in that. Last question, when someone is given a citation, would they be kicked off the system? How does that work? I'm asking this because I know staff is not recommending that option of the on the spot sort of fine, but I just want to get a better sense of what happens when a citation is given.
Again, Tim Kern, Director of Transit Security and Passenger Safety. Generally, when they'll write the citation during the ride and let them continue to their destination. And then they'll issue the ticket and step them off.
Okay, I see how those are two different things now. Okay, I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. And so since this was not a recommendation coming from the Public Security Committee, I won't be making a motion on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp. I see Director Gonzalez. I see Director Moreno, Director Frank. And then we have Director Dillard. Did you have? Okay. And then we've got Director Elo Rivera, Director Bush. Okay, so we will start with Director Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for the thoroughness of the repeated presentations, including the alternative of keeping the on-the-spot payment, but increasing the amount on the spot for thoroughly looking at that in the slide after staff recommendation. thoroughly analyzing it and then dismantling it, but for practical considerations. And I think for those similar practical considerations, I'll be supporting removing on-the-spot payment option. Although with some misgivings, my personal preference might be to try to find some way to work through it, but it is not practicable at this point, just based on the data that's been shared. So I will be supporting it, and I am sensitive to some of the concerns that were raised, but I did hear a public speaker share that they don't think $25 was very onerous of an amount. And I agree. I don't think, it sounds like it probably hasn't been changed for a decade. However, I do have one question. Has it been explored, or could it be explored in the future to have the option for staff to either, well, staff when they're issuing the penalty, or the individual when they're paying the penalty go through a process where they are able to show that they would have been eligible for either a free or reduced ticket and be considered for a reduced fine at that point?
I'm not positive so if the person thinks that they shouldn't have been given a ticket, we do those investigations. The reduced fine, like, so right now, everyone that is eligible to participate, so as long as you don't have another violation that was part of the incident, even if it's your second or third violation, you can pay the $25. Certainly, if people have unique circumstances, we've even had, if people contact us after the 120-day time period, but before the court hearing date, we'll work with them to do diversion, and then we'll send a letter to the court asking them to dismiss the citation. If they don't contact us until after it's gone to court, we have contacts with the public defender's office that work with the homeless court program that we generally connect up with them. You don't have to be homeless in order to get some of the benefits of that. And so we've tried to work on, is there ways to go through that process to get post-conviction relief, where then the court will waive the court fines and dismiss the citations after the fact. So we have that process. I guess I'm not quite sure of what.
I appreciate that and
reduced fine you're
understand
talking
that. I
about.
think my question would be, is it practical and possible either to empower staff or to explore this in the future, that staff would have the enforcement staff would have the opportunity to say, clearly you would have qualified for example, for a free fare if you had gone through the Pronto system because you fit one of the eligible categories. You didn't, however, so I have to issue you a fine, but there is an opportunity to issue you a lower fine because of that circumstance, because of your
Oh.
category.
We currently have the free fare for youth, but that's the only free fare that we have. So, and Tim can speak to how we handle when a youth does not have their Pronto card with them.
Again, Tim Curran. Well, we work with various outreach agencies, but that is not something that we discuss with them.
No, when you encounter a youth on the trolley.
Oh, the youth, I'm sorry.
Without a Pronto card, how do you handle that?
Generally, the youth ride. We let them ride. We advise them how that they need to go, whatever the process is, to their school or whatever the agency that are going to get the card, but we do let them ride.
Yeah, we don't submit citations related to youth to the court. We don't write citations for youth.
And it sounds like this isn't a scenario that's been thoroughly discussed lately because we haven't had the situation lately. So I'd suggest looking at the possibility, another category, for example, a low-income senior that would have at least had the possibility to get discounted fares. Is there any way to empower enforcement staff to, in that scenario, issue a lower fine? I think it's a complicating factor, just like the wrinkle we explored with the alternative that staff found was impractical. But if there is a way to implement that, I think that's a scenario where $25 might be more significant, more punitive than what's intended by this action. With that, I'm happy to leave that with as a comment and encouragement for staff.
Yeah, we can look at that.
We certainly, in the event that the board approves the staff recommendation, we make the changes to the program, we would be monitoring it. We would expect a lot more people to participate in the diversion program because they don't have that on-the-spot option. I'd hope it's a shorter spike and then people get back to just tapping and paying the fare. But we can collect feedback and report back to the board. And if that is an issue that seems to be coming up of the equity of why is my fine $25 when my fare would have been half that, then we can bring some recommendations and just reports on the feedback we've gotten to the board at that time.
Thank you. My second question was going to be about communication, signage or communication period, but you started to address that. So I would just encourage that that be robustly communicated so that especially frequent riders aren't surprised when this change is implemented. And then finally, I would just second some of the sentiments that we can improve the obviousness and the accessibility and the convenience of not just getting the Pronto Pass, but using it for each and every ride as it's supposed to be used. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gonzalez. This is an action item, so approval would require a motion. We will go ahead and move along to Director Moreno, followed by let's go to Director Frank.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Karen. I appreciate the option to, reevaluate this program. Will be supporting it today. I do have concerns that it won't fully address the issues. When this came forward, I had concerns that we were taking all the teeth, all the incentive out of our, out of paying fares. I'm not surprised by the information. I hope none of my board members are surprised. It's interesting, we just approved a budget that we see a clear financial cliff coming. We're having discussions about potentially having to cut services, or potentially explore increasing fares. We're talking about asking residents to pay more in taxes, already overtaxed residents, particularly residents in a place like Poway that isn't on a trolley system. And yet we really have not been focused on doing everything we can to ensure actual trolley riders are paying their fares, already highly subsidized fares. So I'll make a motion for approval to approve staff recommendation. I appreciate the opportunity. I would like to see continued monitoring of this program to see if the $25 fine is enough of an incentive. But I think that I'm not surprised riders were able to quickly figure out the loophole, and we're seeing a huge impact of that. So thank you again, and those are my comments.
Thank you, Director Frank. We have a motion on the floor from Director Frank. We will move now to Director Dillard. Oh, all right. Then we will move to Director Elo Rivera, followed by Director Bush.
For procedural purposes, I'm not going to second. I don't know if you want that just to keep things tight.
Do we have a second? We have a second from Director Hall. Okay.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for all the work on this. I'll keep this relatively, or I'll try to keep this pretty tight. I think there's a lot of conflation, and we are definitely. I think we're making finding a conclusion that we want to find. Do I think there are folks who take the risk? Sure. I also think that we've added a number of variables that could very easily account for a good portion of the reduced per ride revenue that we have. And those are decisions that we made, and I think that this board was, if not unanimously supportive of, close to unanimously supportive of. And we are still working through the rollout of an entire overhaul of our boarding system for trolleys and how folks pay for and not just pay for their fares, but activate the payments that they've made. There's that part of it. And then there's the procedural piece, which I'm actually, I think, equally concerned about. I don't like that this, if I'm understanding correctly, this item was brought to committee, was discussed. It was not stated when it was brought to committee that it was going to be brought to the board as an action item.
It was stated, but it did not come to committee as an action item, nor for feedback to give to the board.
Understood. So I think that to me undermines the committee structure that undermines our authority as board members. And I have a procedural issue with that. If we think, and I'm not going to speculate as to why that was the route chosen, but I don't like that that was the route chosen. Because I don't like that it's the route chosen, I'm not going to be supporting the motion. And I would say that regardless of whether or not I approve the recommendation, the route taken bypassing committee and, from an action standpoint and allowing committee to help shape the recommendation in a more explicit way, it would have been a huge hill for me to get over in order to approve any recommendation brought to us in this manner. So again, I appreciate all the work on this. I understand that there is a revenue issue. I understand that we want folks to pay what they are supposed to pay. I understand and agree with all of that. But how we do that matters, and I can't be supportive of the recommendation in front of us as a result of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Elo Rivera. Director Bush.
Yeah, without repeating all the comments, I appreciate Member Montgomery Stepp for bringing up this item and all of your work that you've been doing in the past couple of years to really research and address this. Yes, I acknowledge that there are a lot of the revenues has dropped, the data is all there. So what's not clear is, like Member Elo Rivera said, is all the data and all the other variables implementing this new system at the same time. And no matter what, this should have gone to Public Security Committee for that full, thorough analysis. So I will not be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bush. Vice Chair Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. Is this a time-sensitive item?
I mean, we felt it was because of the budget discussions. You know, I certainly apologize that, you know, we rushed to get the financial analysis ready for the June 7th board or Public Security Committee meeting, discussed where we were going, and then we were hoping to get the Community Advisory Committee feedback and then discuss it with the board. But certainly it's up to the board to decide if the priority level of, you know, when we take action. I don't want to keep bringing things to the board if they don't want it.
Well, we're losing $1 million a month. So if you want to wait another month, that's what because we're not going to roll this right out. We want to have a good communications plan in place. We would want to, you know, have materials put together that we can hand out, give warnings, all of that kind of stuff. So that's the only time sensitivity.
All right, let's go to Director Moreno, and then we're going to go back to Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp, and then Director Elo Rivera.
Thank you first and foremost, thank you for the presentation. I do appreciate staff looking at the data and understanding the financial impacts of lost fares on MTS. However, the options seem too punitive when compared to the cost of the fare. If someone hasn't paid for the fare, MTS should continue to give them the opportunity to simply pay it. When confronted, going straight to a fine, having to serve hours of community service, or ending up in court, it just honestly seems like overkill to me. I would prefer alternative measures. First, I think we need to explore just having a fare evasion infraction be a what I called administrative process, but I think what was called a civil process. Just like a parking ticket, having someone in court just doesn't make sense to me, to be honest with you. Second, on the program itself, I would ask staff to examine the following options and provide more information to the Public Security Committee. If someone is caught evading the fare, they should be offered the opportunity to pay on the spot with a potential penalty being an increased fare, doubling the fare, for instance. And also, one of the things that that hasn't been, what is the cost of enforcement, and what could the impact be of an on-the-spot increased fare in realizing a percentage of the cost recovery of that? For instance, if someone's caught evading a fare, you know, can they pay double, right, the fare on the spot? A question that I had coming into this meeting is, what's the cost of our officers having to appear in court? That's something that, I don't know what it is, right? And I think it was alluded to the fact that we have a shortage of officers, so, what is the cost, for the MTS, officers? And also the other question I have is, how do other peer agencies, handle the enforcement? That would be something that I think, should be brought back to the committee. I don't expect you to have the answer. The one good thing that I heard about this presentation is that we have more writers. I saw 4 million. Was that the number? Did I get that right or wrong? I don't remember what. That was absolutely music to my ears, to be honest, if I'm gonna shed some light on this issue. I too, Karen, you mentioned, part of this presentation was presented at the budget committee. As the budget, not budget committee, public safety committee. As the budget committee chair, if something was presented, before it was heard at budget committee, I would have major issues with that. And I would ask my colleagues not to move forward with that. So, I think I would support sending this back to public committee, just for further discussion, and for more feedback and for a recommendation from our committee chair and the committee members themselves. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Moreno. We'll go to Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp, followed by Director Elo Rivera.
Thank you so much, Chair, for the additional time. Real quick, a couple of things that were discussed at committee was other revenue sources. I think the board has been asking for additional, a plan around how we can look at additional revenue sources. I think in this context, that's extremely important. Heard a little bit of it in the budget committee, but hasn't been discussed kind of as a standalone item. The other thing that I just continue to talk about is our legislative platform. At the end of the day, we are in our legislative platform. We are looking at ways to provide a sustainable mechanism to allow for free public transit. We know that we're not there, but I would like to see how we're lobbying for that since it is in our platform. And then I just want to say this. I am going to continue to support our new transfer system, the 2-hour transfer window. I think I can't see the future, but that is a part of the discussion here. And I just want to make sure that I'm very clear that I am going to support that moving forward. And so I would, at this time, in hearing my colleagues, I would ask for that additional time, understand our CEO's concerns. I really think, though, that, I hope that this is not true, but that this maybe would have been a better forum to bring forward this staff recommendation for it to pass as opposed to in the committee. I hope that's not the case, but if we're losing $1 million, I think it should have been brought to the committee as an action item, especially since it has been brought a couple of times. The issue is we, and me particularly, continue to ask for more data because there was already a conclusion made prior to this data, really doing a deep dive in this data and seeing in the data that there are multiple issues that we need to discuss. We were not given that in all of the presentations prior to a couple weeks ago. And so that lends itself for additional questions. I would ask my colleagues to vote no with the motion on the floor and ask that this come back to the next public security meeting with an actual recommendation that is coming out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp. Director Elo Rivera.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure that I understand this part. Is staff's position that we will regain $1 million in revenue when this policy changes?
I mean, it won't be overnight, but it'll be eventually.
Okay, well, I think that is an unfair way to position this in front of the board. To say that the option in front of us is to delay $1 million in revenue or not, that does not feel like a good faith argument. I have an issue with that. We are making tough decisions. We have champions of public transportation on this board who are completely invested in making this work. And the idea that we are just, kind of flippantly foregoing $1 million in revenue per month is not something that should be thrown out into the air lightly. So unless we can back that up with data, I'd appreciate that statements like that not be made. There are a lot of reasons why the per ride revenue has gone down. Again, several of those, if not most of those, were unanimously supported by this board. I think that the vision that I have interpreted over my time on this board is one where we increase ridership in a significant way, and in doing so, revenue will increase over time. I have significant concerns that every conversation, that many conversations are now being dictated not by those of us who support public transportation, but by those who have no interest in seeing public transportation succeed. And that we are chasing something that we will not catch, which is support for public transportation from those who will never, ever support it. And I really hope that we do not fall into that trap, because it is a trap that has been set on multiple fronts and has been successful in undermining important public investment in whether that's public housing or public transportation. I'm not going to be part of that. I'm going to continue to oppose that. And I really hope this agency doesn't go down that path. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear in terms of what the options were in front of us. It is not to increase revenue by $1 million per month starting next month. And that we are being really clear about the different paths that we have in front of us in terms of recovering that revenue. Thank you again, Chair.
Thank you, Director Elo Rivera. Any further comments on this item? Vice Chair Goebel.
A quick question for my colleague. Do you think the sense of the Public Security Committee would be the staff recommendation would still be the same coming out of the Public Security Committee? Perhaps with more or not? What's your sense?
I think the Public Security Committee was very open to staff recommendation because of what we're facing, right? And there was no sort of pushback on the facts in front of us. But it did also bring up other concerns about the entire kind of the perfect storm that we're in right now that is creating this. When previously the narrative was that it was just the fare diversion program, right? So I think that I can't speak for the entire committee. It is a committee of 5 or 6 of us, and I'm only one person. From the very beginning, when I brought these things forward, I wanted to monitor them and be thoughtful about the impact on the entire line. But my plan is to, depending on what the board decides today, have another discussion about this and come back to the board with actual concrete recommendations, and also have an item about that civil administrative process. Because I think for me, if this staff recommendation moves forward, my main goal was to always have people be accountable, but not have them pay the rest of their lives for it in various different financial ways. So I can't speak for the board, but that's the vision that I have.
Where I'm going is kind of a middle ground here to say, could this be phase 1 to approve the motion as stated, with phase 2 going back to the Public Safety Committee to address the other concerns surrounding things outside the recommendation? Is that?
I just think that it was not done properly. And so that if it would have come in June as an action item, I would have lived with whatever the committee said, even if it wasn't necessarily what I believe. It didn't happen like that. And I just, that level, to me, it's not appropriate.
I respect and understand that. I'm going to support the motion as stated, because I think the public is expecting us to not let loopholes exist in our system. At the same time, I do think we need more work at the Public Safety Committee, and it probably should have been vetted a little differently. I agree with you. But I will be supporting this as a phase 1 with interest in whatever your concerns are fleshed out at the Safety Committee for recommendation to the board. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Director Hall.
The next public security meeting wouldn't be till September sometime. And so if we're going to actually work on this, I think we need to call a special meeting of the Public Security Committee. And just, we could pass this today and then revise it in the meantime with public security and then bring it back as revised. Or not pass it today.
Chair Pro Tem Montgomery.
I don't plan on calling a special meeting because I really want to bring a robust civil or administrative process to the committee. I think that's a part of this equation. So I need time to do that.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? Director Donovan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I tend to be a process-oriented person, and listening to the debate, I don't think the benefit of going forward with this now would outweigh the proper, coming back to the security. And full disclosure, I'm a member of the committee. I couldn't make it to the meeting earlier this month. I was out of town. So I'm not saying this because I wasn't at the meeting, but I just think from a process standpoint, I would rather see a full vetting with the Public Safety Committee before the full board approves something at this level. There may be other ideas that come out. I appreciate the comment that in general, the committee seemed to agree with the recommendation. But for example, Member Moreno made a comment, what if we said, we're going to charge you 2 or 3 times the rate, not $25. And then if it keeps happening, then you kind of ratchet it up. So it just seems to me there's other ideas that could be vetted through the Public Safety Committee. So at this point, I'd be voting no against the current motion.
Thank you, Director Donovan. Any further discussion on the motion in front of us?
Could I suggest that perhaps we just table the item until we take it back to the committee, refer it back to the committee?
Yeah, you know what, I'll go ahead and agree with that because we're in a situation where I think it's going to fail either way, just looking at the mood of the board. So I think we ought to just table it and bring it back to, but I would like to see if we could, I know you don't want to do that, bring a, because it's not till September and we're in June. And it would be good to bring it back in maybe late July or early August and just have a special meeting then.
I will consider that. I'll consider it. Thanks.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is a substitute motion to refer this item to the Public Security Committee for consideration. Is that a motion that since you were the original maker of the motion? Okay, so we're going to get that motion from Director Hall, I think, to refer this to the Public Security Committee. Do we have a second? We have a second from Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp with, I think I heard a request to take this up at the earliest possible convenience. Is there any further discussion on the substitute motion in front of us? Seeing none, this sounds like a voice vote to me. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. That motion carries unanimously. Thank you for the robust discussion on this. We are going to continue items 23 and 24 to a future meeting because we do have a closed session item that we want to get to. We will also continue the chair, board member, and CEO communications unless there is anything that anybody wants to bring forward. Seeing none, then we are going to move into closed session. The next Board of Directors meeting is scheduled for July 18th at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we will now move into closed session. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yes, good. Clerk, do we have any public comment for closed session?
We do. Phone number ending in 3731. Please dial *6 to unmute yourself.
Whoa, good catch there at the last second. I did that on purpose to make sure you could not go into closed session. It's very important that I help delay this meeting because it's not quite 12 o'clock yet, so we got a little bit of time. SDG&E versus MTS. Has MTS paid their fare to SDG&E? Is there not a diversion program that MTS can use to get out of this case? Did MTS not follow a clean procedural process with SDG&E? does this have to do with MTS now moving towards electricity eater ZEBs and not paying their high and ever increasing electricity bills? I mean, that's what I saw in the item we didn't get to talk about. How sad, you know. I wanted to talk about the ZEB zero emission buses as if there's such a thing when they emit lithium and radiation. Let's see, what else can I say about this? There should be some kind of diversion for MTS. Maybe if you just pay like 4 times the fine to SDG&E, you can get out of the case. Doesn't that sound fair? 4 times the price? I think it does. But I really don't have much else to say because I didn't research this case and I don't need to. So, you know, I'm going to let you guys go back there and pretend you did something for an hour. So I'll see some of you crazy people tomorrow, I bet. All right. Have a good one. Goodbye. Thank you.
Next is the original DRA. Please unmute yourself now.
Yeah, interesting with SDG&E and
The original DRA, please unmute yourself.
I'm trying, it keeps muting. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Weird. Okay. Yeah, with SDG&E, they've been, you know, robbing people blind for decades and overcharging people, pretending that it's, you know, going to provide the services that need to be provided when in fact they're just, you know, it's a big old scam. And so, you know, I don't actually know if this has to do with you paying them or anything, but you should actually be suing them and we shouldn't be paying them the rates that they are being, you know, asking for, because all it's doing is putting money in their pockets. And, you know, with everything wanting to go into electric, you know, what's that gonna, no wonder why there's a deficit too, because you would have to pay out extreme amounts of money just to be able to provide the service to the people, all while it's putting the money in the pockets of SDG&E. And it's just, it's sad that, you know, everything is like all about making money. It doesn't have anything to do with providing a service, just like with you guys. Like, everybody's always so frivolous with money and just negligent with it that we don't get the things that we should be getting.
30 seconds
And
left.
you're never going to even tell us what's going to happen after closed session, because you guys like to say, oh, we spend hours or an hour back there or however long you do. And then you don't ever tell the people what actually happened in there. And that should be something that you guys do to be transparent with the public. So at least they have a little bit of information on what was taking place. And it's never just, you know, obfuscated every time.
That concludes public comment, Chair.
Thank you, Clerk. Again, the next Board of Directors meeting is scheduled for July 18th at 9 in the morning. And at this time, we will move into closed session. Thank you.
Reporting out of closed session, agenda item number 28, San Diego Gas and Electric Company versus MTS. The board received a report from legal counsel and gave instructions.
This meeting is now adjourned.